I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Generally, you said feminism is
here's what actually happened.
This the foundation of all knowledge.
I'm really mad that
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop. Stop.
The deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
And to lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong. You're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main thing of politics, right? This is my ideology. So 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Cool, Robert. Oh, that? With a crowbar, you said.
And good ladies, I can't even talk. It's already there. Here we go. End show. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sarah the Raging Tomato here bringing to you live another Moderator Monday. This evening I have with me Ryan Mullalley, GenZAttorney, Nonfon, and Pisco back for another round. The statement of the evening is the left has abandoned the American moral proposition. Ryan, why don't you kick us off with your opening statement, please?
Thanks so much for having me on, Sarah. I'm Ryan Mullalley. I'm a former teacher, a current attorney, and I've litigated at every level of the U.S. legal system, including the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm arguing for the proposition tonight that the left has abandoned America's moral proposition. So the first question is, for a lot of you probably, what is America's moral proposition? It's a fair question and one you shouldn't have to ask. If you had been properly educated in American philosophy, it's something you would already know, but many of you don't. And many of you don't because our schools don't teach it. And our schools don't teach it, and I should know as a former teacher, because they are primarily dominated by a particular ideology that has rejected the American moral proposition. So what is the American moral proposition? It's not actually up for debate. America's a propositional nation. We were founded on the idea that there's a particular American philosophy. We're not a theocracy. We're not a ethno-state. We are founded on this philosophy, and this philosophy is what binds us. And just like the Constitution tells us what the laws of America are, our moral proposition is found in the other founding document, the Declaration of Independence, which lays out the moral proposition clearly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. That is the American moral proposition. It's about the fact that we have equal dignity, that we were instilled by God, our creator, with certain natural rights that do not flow from the government, but are moral obligations that are of a higher order than the government. Unfortunately, the modern left has abandoned these principles. Equality has turned into equity. Individual rights has turned into collectivism. And you see this as the left increasingly embraces collectivism in all its forms: Marxism, neo-Marxism, socialism, and even communism. Ironically, in the name of progress, the progressives are moving away from the moral foundation that was what we had all our progress as a nation built on. When Lincoln debated Douglas about slavery, he invoked natural rights as his argument for why slavery was wrong. Ditto Frederick Douglass, ditto Martin Luther King Jr. This is our moral foundation. This is how we've accomplished all we did as a nation. But now, today, it's not good enough. Now equality needs to be abandoned in favor of equity. Now we need the government to ensure equality of outcome rather than preserve our natural rights. This is not a subtle change. It's an obvious change. It's a self-evident change, to use the words of our founders, and one that many people intuit. And even if they can't put words on them, it disquiets them. It makes them feel like something has gone deeply wrong. And I would posit it's why the left has been so broadly unpopular of late. Because this is such a clear point, I suspect my opponents will struggle. And I say opponents, these are friends. So, my friends on the other side, I should say. But I think they're going to struggle to discredit that proposition. So instead, I suspect most of our conversation is going to be about fighting over definitions, irrelevant whataboutisms about Trump or MAGA, because truthfully, nothing you can say about the right has any bearing on the proposition we're debating tonight, which is purely about the left. Or, the always classic maneuver, moving the goalposts and saying, yes, it's happening, but in fact, it is a good thing. So I think with that, I'll leave it to my colleagues. And I think we'll work through this argument quickly and easily tonight because it's so obviously true.
Thank you, Ryan. And GenZAttorney, to you, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for having me. My name's Scott, or Scotty-O, aka the GenZAttorney, and me and Ryan, we actually are working on our own project together. We've got a podcast called the Ordered Liberty Podcast, where we talk about all these types of issues, streaming Sunday nights, 8 o'clock on both of our channels. But funnily enough, aside from that, we did not actually coordinate anything tonight other than the thing Ryan brought up about this conversation really has to focus on the left. That's the only thing we said ahead of time. We came in with matching fits, and he basically ripped my entire opening statement that I spent the last 2 hours putting together. So it's unfortunate, but you pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything. That America is a moral propositional nation, and is exactly right. It's the Declaration of Independence that lays out that moral proposition. And I actually got the quote he just read out broken down into separate points. We'll go through that in depth as we go on. I'll expand it, though, with the Constitution is the codification. It's more of a legalistic document, but it is the codification of the moral foundation. And the Federalist Papers are the argument for why we should codify this moral principle. So I'll be referring back to those three kind of throughout the night as we establish, right, what is the moral proposition. But in that vein, though, I kind of had a few main takeaways as to how we define this moral proposition. First, it is that rights are God-given and they do pre-exist government instead of coming from the government. It's this idea of negative rights, not positive rights. Second, beyond that, main rights are, of course, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I'm including property in there. Of course, that's the John Locke, Adam Smith original saying, life, liberty, and property. Jefferson changed it in the Declaration, but changed it to a more expansive term that you can argue encompasses property. But in that sense, the Constitution is rife with recognitions that property rights are fundamental to the American structure, and there has to be a strong protection of private property and a robust free market surrounding that. Beyond that, it is justice. Is actually a quote from Federalist 51 about justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society, and not meaning the destruction. End meaning it is the purpose of a civil society, and the moral proposition is that it is individual justice. That it is a country of laws, not a country of men. That has to reign supreme. So individual justice. And finally, that men are not angels, and therefore the checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism are necessary and mandatory under the style of governance. I would argue the left has abandoned these principles by saying that a belief that God has no place at all first, that really God doesn't exist and or has no place at all in society, the strict separationist view of the left wing of judicial interpretation. Belief that rights come from the government, not from God, and that these rights are positive rights. Think rights to food, rights to housing, rights to healthcare, as we hear our friends on the left advocating for. Not a huge fan of property rights on the left, between Marxism, socialism, communism, calling to abolish private property, constantly campaigning against the 1% and wealth taxes and abolishing billionaires and whatnot, and really just the constant railing against capitalism. Social justice reigns supreme over individual justice. And really, all these types of justice you hear, whether it's climate justice, social justice, cosmic justice, reproductive justice, none of that is real justice. Individual justice is the only true justice. And that's where this term equity comes from. And equity, I would submit that Joe Biden openly said he made a core function of his entire administration. And so it is not just the fringe 6 follower accounts on Blue Sky. This is a core tenet of the left. And I think I'll leave it at that, as far as I know I'm running up to my time, but lots more to talk about. Thank you again for having me here. GenZAttorney on YouTube and the GenZAttorney on Twitter X. You're muted.
I forgot. Nonfon, to you, please. And thank you, Scott.
Sure. So I think, firstly, it is relevant that just like currently, I do see the left like fighting for principles that I think are in line with America's founding and America's moral proposition. I mean, the rule of law and checks and balances are things that I think, left-leaning law firms, for example, are fighting for in a court against. I understand this prompt is about the left, but it is relevant. I think that it is against at least a segment of the right that is currently in power. I, of course, have issues with the belief in inalienable rights, but I think more relevant, it's sort of silly to say that just because some of the values that left-leaning people sometimes have like fall outside of the narrow scope of what some of the founders defined natural rights as being, that the left has holistically therefore abandoned America's moral proposition. And in fact, I think a lot of the values like equality or some notion of positive rights being provided to people, like I think those values are perfectly in line with the actual the sort of realization of the goals from establishing those natural rights. And that seems to be something that the American populace generally has always had, some belief of. Obviously, today, I think if you poll people, they would not say something like providing people with some right to healthcare is like fundamentally un-American. I imagine that's the case historically as well. That's part of the reason why we enacted, welfare programs, for example, in the first place.
Thank you, Nonfon, and Pisco, to you, please.
Yeah, so I understand the left to be people on the political left of America, as the question is understood, and that to be largely represented by the Democratic Party. I think in the context of that question, it doesn't really make sense to talk about the left differently. So that's how I understand that term to be applied in the context of the question. And I take the American moral proposition. I have to tell you that that's not a phrase that I know to be like have a specific technical meaning, but I understand that as a commitment just to the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States. And I don't understand that term to be more narrow than that. I mean, it's all well and good to reference the natural rights philosophies of the framers and stuff, but they were not in agreement of what those terms that they were talking about even meant, right? Like, so Ryan, for example, cites property as well. Like, what does that mean? Does that include squatters' rights? What is a taking under the takings clause? What are the extent of those property rights? What are, like, for example, like self-defense rules with regard to property? And so it requires a commitment to institute governments to resolve these issues about what these rights or equality before law actually means. And similarly with like the term liberty, right? And when you said the Declaration of Independence, the framers weren't in agreement of whether we should be able to own people. Does property right extend over owning individuals? And so to the extent that there is a through line between the founding era generation and today and what the basic American moral propositions, it's not on what is the necessary entailment of the words like property or liberty or what these rights actually mean. It's a commitment more to a structure and a process to discover the rights. For example, like the Ninth Amendment says the Constitution doesn't disparage the potential that there exist other rights outside of the document. And so basically, once you start to get more granular than that, a commitment to the Constitution and to the rule of law, you're starting to get into areas in which there was never agreement. There was vast ecclesiastical and religious differences at the time of the framing. It's not a commitment to God. That is not a basic American moral proposition that you could get more narrow on it. And so the more you try to segment it into like a particular sort of philosophy that you're advocating, a normative philosophy, you're going to get farther and farther away from the framing generation, and it's going to start to lose its universality, and therefore, like the notion that it's an American moral proposition in the first place. So I don't think that God and the arguments for God are essential to the American moral proposition, and I don't think a particular view, for example, of like political and economic doctrines that didn't even exist at the framing, like Marxism and communism, and certainly not forms of socialism that have taken hold in the Democratic Party that are consistent with and provide no contradiction with some of the notions of property rights and liberty, at least as I understand those. So yeah, I think that is how I understand those terms. And on the actual proposition, the Democratic Party has not abandoned commitment to the rule of law of the Constitution of the United States. To the contrary, they're the ones trying to uphold those basic protections and those constitutional liberties and to police them at the margins where it does become relevant whether or not the left has abandoned that proposition, the extent to which they're fighting for it. And that's why it's relevant that they're fighting MAGA, right? Like the fact that they haven't abandoned the fight against MAGA who is in contradiction to the American moral proposition, is relevant to the evidentiary case of whether they have abandoned the American moral proposition as I understand it. So that's why it will become relevant what they're doing in opposition to Trump, because that bears on the evidentiary case as to whether or not they are supporting the American moral proposition.
Perfect. Thank you. And to the audience, all four of these gentlemen are streaming on their own ends. Please feel free to go like, subscribe, and share on their behalf. Oh, pardon me. And of course, our I can't even talk tonight. Our lineup this evening, we're going to get through the debate. We will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats. And then, of course, if you have something to add to this panel, we will go into open panel afterwards. Gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
I mean, I would just for my own amusement, if nothing else, would like to start with the fact that all three things I predicted would happen happened instantly and in the opening statements. So that's fun. We got the definitions, we got the what about Trump, and then we got the no, we actually think it's good to move on from the American moral proposition.
Can we stop here though? Because
in quick order. Well, I mean, let me just finish. I mean, I'm just warming up to a point. Because definitions are going to matter quite a lot. It seems like we should probably start there before we get into anything else. It's going to be hard to. I hopefully we can move past.
Totally agree, Ryan. Quickly. Yeah, Ryan, I totally agree with that. I just want to say it's not of note that we would be talking about meaning if you haven't like sort of priced in meaning into the proposition. Then of course it's not deceptive or wrong or how you're implying with your tone of voice there that we would be like talking about the meaning of what these terms is. To understand the proposition for the debate, we need to understand what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah,
so
and I'm proposing we start with definitions, but I was just noting.
No, but the fact that you would take it as you did, and don't try to say that you didn't, from the start of the debate, like, I expect them to do that. Of course, you would expect any person to try to understand the moral proposition by saying what we're talking about. And likewise, just because you say it's not relevant to talk about Trump, to the extent that there's an evidentiary case to talk about Trump that's related to the proposition as we understand it, of course, we're totally fine to talk about that too.
So let's do this in reverse order then, since I'd like to do definitions first, but I'm not going to let this turn into a Trump conversation. So if right now, and I don't think this is true, by the way, but if I were to concede that the right, and again, this is just for the sake of argument, if I conceded for the sake of argument that the right had abandoned America's moral proposition, how would that impact this proposition?
Because for the evidentiary case, right? So the proposition that the left has abandoned it, that will be affected, yes or no, by how much they're fighting against others who have abandoned that proposition and are trying to ensconce that proposition.
No, because fighting against someone who's abandoned the proposition only matters if you're fighting for the proposition. Like if the right had totally abandoned it, the left could have totally abandoned it too.
No, I understand.
It's completely irrelevant to the topic.
So what I'm saying is, to the extent that evidence of the left upholding the American moral proposition is shown by them fighting on those grounds, on the specific American moral proposition against those who are not upholding and trying to undermine the American moral proposition. I'm not saying that it has to be untethered resistance to those who have abandoned, but tailored resistance on specifically the point I'm talking about, the American moral proposition. That would be relevant, wouldn't it?
If you're saying,
to the evidentiary case.
If you're pointing out that the left is specifically fighting for the American moral proposition, that's not about the right anymore. That's about the left. If you like that's the issue. What's not the issue is how bad the right is in your estimation.
But the left's
But I think we've made the point. I don't know if there's
Ryan, like you would, I think, and I think you said it before. You would agree, for example, like the ACLU. I think you consider sort of like a left-wing institution, right?
At this point, not historically, but today.
Sure, and then like we do see examples of the ACLU and I do think it is relevant. Like they're fighting the right, they're fighting Trump by filing lawsuits, for example, on the behalf of immigrants who were deported without due process. Which I think you would agree, due process is something that is relevant to America's moral
fire
proposition.
too. Just to add to that, like fire, right? The fact that fire is doing a good job is informed by what? It's informed by the fact of what they're up against, right? So surely you're going to cite. If this were a debate about fire, this is an analogy, analogized reasoning. If this were a debate about whether fire were upholding the American moral proposition, you would obviously take into account what they're fighting against. It obviously is part of the evidentiary case. So for you to say it's irrelevant makes no sense. Of course it's relevant.
But here's the problem, though. Here's the problem. You can't have it both ways. It can't simultaneously be that the left has not abandoned the moral proposition. They're actually upholding it. But also, they have abandoned it because they have to in order to fight back against the right. So I feel like y'all's got to pick one or the other and stick with it. So which one?
There's no contradiction there. So I do not hold that they've abandoned it because they need to fight the right. I'm saying they're upholding it, and one of the ways in which they're upholding it is by fighting the right who has abandoned it on the terms of abandonment, not on anything.
Why does
right?
So why does it matter to bring up what the right is doing at all if you're saying the left is upholding it? Let's just focus on what the left is doing and whether or not they're actually upholding
because
it.
What the left is doing, in part of how they're upholding it, is in resisting the right's efforts to abandon American moral proposition. And so the evidence that I would give to say, no, you're wrong, the left is abandoned, because look at what they're doing. Well, part of how I know what they're doing is defending the American moral proposition is to see what they're resisting. That is to say, if the right is pushing to end the American moral proposition, as I understand it, and the left is trying to prevent that from happening, then knowing what they're trying to prevent from happening obviously is relevant to understanding whether they've abandoned that principle. You must concede that.
Here's where I don't want to get derailed, and maybe we can just agree on this, and I think it'll make the debate easier. Let's take the extreme characterization of both parties, right? Let's say that the left is all communists and the right are all Nazis, right? In that universe, they are fighting each other, but they've both abandoned the American moral proposition.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, right. So the fact that they're fighting each other doesn't matter.
But I'm not saying the mere fact of fighting.
If you want to cite examples of the fact that the left is specifically standing up for things that you believe are part of the American moral proposition, that's obviously fine because you're talking about how the left, in fact, affirms the American moral proposition. What I think is not productive and kind of frankly would just be a whataboutism in this context and derails from the debate is lengthy discussions about what your problems with the right are, because that's quite frankly just a separate topic. If you and I wanted to have a debate about whether the right has abandoned American moral proposition, that would be a fun follow-up debate, but it's just not the one we're having tonight.
Ryan, I'm happy to grant that mere opposition is not enough to make the case here. It's not relevant. But I'm not saying, I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that mere opposition is what makes the case. I'm saying opposition with respect to the areas in which the right is abandoning the moral proposition, and specifically to stop that is relevant. And I'll give you an example. You can grant if you think it's responsive. So, for example, if the Trump administration were doing something like, we are now collectivizing all private property in the state of whatever state, and the Democrats were trying to prevent that, right? It would be relevant to bring up what Trump was trying to do and that the Democrats are trying to prevent it, correct?
Sorry, can you say the example again?
So the hypothetical, it didn't happen, but it's a hypothetical, that Trump were trying to collectivize all property in a given area or in a given industry. And that I'm trying to appeal to your sense of the American moral proposition. And price in whatever thing that you think would be blatantly counter to that. And the Democrats were trying to stop that and prevent that from occurring for the purpose of preventing the decay of the American moral proposition. You would say it would then, therefore, be relevant to bring up what Trump was doing, correct?
Maybe. It would depend on how you phrased it. But I think we can kind of police that. I think we could probably call the ball.
I think I want to make sure I'm understanding, because I do see a prompt shift based on ish. But you're saying, Pisco, that the left has not abandoned, they're merely reacting to the right's abandonment. Is that what I'm saying?
No, I'm not trying to change the proposition at all. What I'm saying is what's relevant to the evidentiary case of whether it's true, in fact, that the left has abandoned the American moral proposition is the extent to which they're fighting against the end of the American moral proposition. So if they're fighting on every ground, right, to prevent the end of the American moral proposition, then the evidentiary case that they've abandoned it is weaker. So that's why it's relevant to bring up what they're fighting against. If it is in fact connected to the American moral proposition, I would grant, obviously, that mere opposition, or if I just said Trump is this, Trump is that, Trump is that, without mentioning the ways in which the left are trying to specifically contradict him on those areas, would be irrelevant. So I'm happy to grant that. But there are ways in which, of course, it would be relevant to bring up Trump's conduct to the extent that it bears on the American moral proposition and to the extent that the left is fighting it on those grounds.
I'm not trying to rule out the theoretical possibility that there is some example where this works out. What I'm trying to head off at the pass is this turning into just a conversation about why you think the right is bad, which is just not what the debate is about. I think we've kind of hashed this out sufficiently. Okay. I don't know, Sarah, if you feel like you need to give a ruling, that's fine. But I think we can probably self-police, and you can call the ball in the air if you think it needs to be called, Sarah.
Yeah, I think you're all you're tracking each other, right? Everybody understands where we're going with the conversation. I think Ryan's only fear might just be going down the Trump direction too much, or going kind of into blame the right in aspect. Is that
I hear that? I understand that. It's just very hard to disentangle the efforts of the Democrats and the left in a context which divorces Trump. I mean, their actions are always going to be seen in like the American context, and the fact that it's the current year, the current problems, and that the fact that they're fighting against a particular administration. And so all of that will bear on like their ideology, on what they want to do, on how they see the world. And it's really hard to divorce that from like the current context.
As long as you're talking about what they stand for, not merely what they stand 100%. Against, I think that's interesting. If you're talking about what they stand
against informs what they stand for, right?
No, but that this is actually the heart. This is the heart of the criticism in many ways. Like part of what made me interested in this prompt is I got the sense that the Democrats were using opposition to Trump to mask a kind of civil war that was happening on the left that seems to be being won by particularly un-American ideas, but I guess we'll see how that plays out. Because they are uncomfortable articulating what they stand for. And I think like when you look at even linguistically, the shift from equality to equity, linguistically, you see exactly what I'm talking about, which is anyone who thinks about this for even a couple seconds is going to say, well, equality means one thing, equity must mean something else. That's why they're using that term. And, Kamala Harris put it very well. I thought she did a fair job of defining it when she said that equity is when everybody gets to the same place. But of course, if you have liberty, people will not get to the same place. If people are treated equally under law and they have liberty, people will not get to the same place. To get people to the same place, you have to cut against liberty. You have to cut against equality. That's inherent in what it means to get everybody to the same place. So I think that when we see these terms, new terms being developed on the left, we need to ask why they're using those terms. And I think it's fair to use the definitions given by the most prominent left-wing politicians. And that does strike me as a departure from the American moral proposition as articulated in the Declaration of Independence.
We can definitely talk about that and the extent to which their ideology stands on all fours and by itself and what it means and the representations by representatives. I'm totally happy to get into that. I don't see how it bears on what we were just talking about, which is like the nature of the evidence that you bring to bear. But presumably if this were
I was trying to start the conversation rather than to have a meta conversation.
I know. But the last note on this, and then we can move on to what you want to talk about with equity and all that stuff, is I assume if you're having a conversation about whether the right had abandoned the American moral proposition, it would be relevant had or had not, to talk about the extent to which the right was fighting against the left's use of equity, right? So you'd be like, look, the right wing hasn't abandoned the moral proposition because they're fighting against the Democrats who are trying to implement equity, DEI, all that stuff. And that part of your prior on whether or not the right is standing for the American moral proposition has to deal with like the evidentiary case of what they're doing, and what they're doing is going to be informed by their opposition. And so I think you would grant that would be relevant. I'm happy to move on
real quick on that. I think everyone can realize, obviously, none of these actions are happening inside of a vacuum. There's always going to be cause of action A, then B, then C, and it's just ping pong back and forth. So I don't think anyone is not able to comprehend that. I think the issue is like the example you gave earlier. If you say if Trump were to collectivize all the private property, and now we want to talk about how the Democrats are responding to that, I think that's fine as far as like, okay, there's the factual predicate, just as like to get us to where we're talking about the less response. Like the main concern is like, well, we need to talk about exactly why that the collectivization of that private property is just such a terrible thing. Like, I think we can all be mature enough to recognize, like, none of this happens in a vacuum, but the main focus of the conversation is going to be on the left, whether or not they've abandoned. Okay, cool.
I'm on board.
Okay. And Nonfon, I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity if you needed to chime anything in there.
I'm good for now.
Okay.
I love the Pisco Ryan show, but
Well,
I'm sure.
It sounds like everybody's on board. We're all on the same track. Then I give it back to you.
So
you want to talk about the equity thing? So
yeah, we can start there.
Well, let's frame it first. Sorry, real quick. Let's frame it just through the Declaration of Independence. This is our foundational moral document for the country. And I think me and Ryan would both agree the whole nature and idea of equity is a stark contrast to the principles laid out inside the Declaration, which is that all men are created equal and are entitled to these inalienable rights of life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. And when you start imposing these equitable principles, which is more of a collective justice principle, that stands completely contradictory to the founding principles of individual justice. Ryan, is that a fair summation of your point as well?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think we saw this idea percolate as ideas tend to, especially on the left, from academia and in well-sourced, famous academics who were espousing this and similar concepts. It was adopted by the Biden administration, certainly, and by the Harris when she was running. And its impact is obvious on both the language, but also the policies of the left. And this was, I'm not talking about like in this, I think, well, actually, that's something we might want to get into later. I'm not talking about the fringe left, though I think the fringe left has obviously abandoned the American moral proposition. But we're talking here even on kind of like the mainstream left, these terms brought in. So to the extent that the audience is convinced that these terms are, in fact, evidence of a departure from the American moral proposition, I think it's clear as day on the policies of the Biden administration and the Harris administration.
Yeah, at that level of granularity, the American moral proposition cannot include the kind of conflict on the term equity that you're talking about. Because remember, it needs to persist across the temporality back to the framers. And the framers' vision of equality understood included slavery and the inclusion of having an entire class of people who weren't really people and property. So you can't get this notion of the American moral proposition that has this level of granularity on DEI and equity once you acknowledge that the framers were fine with slavery in their vision of equality. So it needs to be some level of generality greater than the specifics of what the framers would have approved of and their vision of equality under the law.
But see, I have to push back hard because I don't think it's fair to just say as a blanket statement, the framers were okay with slavery. I think we can all agree as students of the history, there was a clear conflict, and Jefferson actually had a clause in the Declaration denouncing slavery, but took it out as an effort to try and build a unity, to actually build a revolution. When you're fighting against the largest military superpower on the face of the earth at the time, you kind of got to get off the ground. That's a fight. If you're interested in winning, you got to build some bridges, even with some people you're going to disagree with.
Madison owned slaves?
I think the fact that there is disagreement between the founders on that is also evidence that you need.
That's also evidence, correct?
No.
But hold on,
yes,
wait.
It is.
1 second, Ryan. But you would agree then that's a significant distinction from just saying, well, the founders were cool with slavery, to now we're saying, well, it was a little bit, didn't some of them own slaves? Like, that's a completely different statement than they were just all.
They're different statements. Wait, no, they're different statements. But when I say that they were okay with slavery, they incorporated that as part of their compromise. When I say okay, I just mean that they were willing to abide a framework that allowed for and ensconced slavery. And all the major framers, or most of the major framers, either approved of that compromise or were outright slave owners. George Washington, major figure in the framing of the Constitution. It was based on, the Washingtonian view of the Constitution, I think, is understudied. Madison owned slaves. Jefferson owned slaves. So regardless of when I say okay, I just mean it was part of their compromise. And yes, they were hypocrites sometimes and they wrote other things, but that's what I mean. And the fact that there was not a consensus there means you cannot get to the level of granularity of DEI if you can't do it with slavery? I mean,
No,
it's an absurd conclusion.
Pisco, you're misunderstanding what's meant by like an objective moral proposition. So when like the founders, particularly most of them, at least the ones who wrote the document, ascribed to something called Scottish common sense moral realism, meaning, as relevant here, they believed in objective, real moral principles. So they view natural rights, natural law as real. Like it's like the laws of physics, the laws of math, the laws of nature, as they put it in the document. That's the philosophy that is espoused in that document. Now, when there's an objective moral standard, it stands to reason that people can be wrong about it. Of course they can be wrong about it. Newton was wrong about physics. He was wrong about physics a lot. He didn't know what Einstein knew. He didn't know about relativity. He doesn't know about quantum mechanics. So a lot of the stuff that Newton said is incorrect in light of our current understanding of the laws of physics, but that doesn't mean physics doesn't exist or that there's nothing there to talk about. Like there are founders who thought slavery was not like abhorrent under natural law. They were wrong. And in fact, when you look at Lincoln, let's see if I think I have a good quote here. Even like 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, invoking the Declaration of Independence. When he said, when he was arguing against Douglas, he invoked the Declaration of Independence. He invoked natural rights and natural law, especially to say that slavery was wrong. So what you see is a developing understanding of what natural rights are, just like a discovery of the laws of physics. But what you see on the left with equity is a move in the wrong direction. We've already learned that individual rights are primary, but now they're trying to put collectivism on top of it. So it's very different to say that there were founders who made mistakes and they didn't know this yet versus people today who do know this and are going the wrong direction.
So there's going to be a contradiction that's going to be exposed. So I'll give you the following. So were the framers, had they abandoned the American moral proposition? No, even though they were wrong objectively, right?
People can make a mistake without abandoning the moral proposition.
Okay. So
like for example,
if the left, so you know where I'm going to get the contradiction? I'm about to go there. Wait, come on.
Let me answer the question, Pisco.
Hold on. I did want, because Pisco, it sounded like you had some clarification on top of that question. If you don't mind, Ryan, I'd like to at least allow him to clarify the question.
So this is where I'm going, and Ryan can answer and rebut it. So where I'm going is, if it's possible for the founders to not have abandoned the American moral position, but by just being objectively wrong about slavery, then why would the left being objectively wrong about DEI entail that they're abandoning the American moral proposition? That's what he needs to explain.
For the same reason that if Newton said what he said about physics, he was wrong compared to our modern day understanding, right? Which includes relativity. That's very different than if I today was saying, you know what? Screw relativity. Newtonian physics is the only way to go. We build our understanding of natural law over time. The founders didn't abandon natural law. They were wrong, or at least some of them were wrong in some cases. But what they were right about was a foundation that actually led to the abolishment of slavery throughout the Western world. So good on them for getting the main principle right, even though that took some time to develop, and in fact was the ticking time bomb, as it's been described, that led to the abolition movement. But beyond that, what you see on the left is fundamentally different because they know better. The history exists. They are actually attempting to undo the moral proposition and go backwards.
You just said it yourself. You said Jefferson knew better. You said Madison knew better, that these founders at the time that slavery was around, they knew better. They were writing that slavery was abhorrent. And so this distinction doesn't help you, because even if I were to grant that what really matters is the modern day leftist, it's not that they're building upon a foundation and making mistakes along the way. It's they're abandoning things that have already been resolved. It hasn't been resolved. This specific issue is much more modern than the one of slavery. Even if I were to grant that, it would be true of the framers, because the framers understood the arguments on slavery, and some even granted it. So you can't do this veil of ignorance thing to distinguish them.
That's completely untrue, Pisco. Like at the time of the founding, there was not even scientific consensus that the races were the same species. That came later. Like there was
slavery.
Yeah. There was
whether they're the same species. Like they're the framers.
Pisco, we do enslave other species. That's what pets like. That's like.
I understand, but what I'm saying is the framers, regardless of their scientific views about whether they're different species, the framers at the time, the ones who Jefferson himself knew enough to know that it was morally wrong to have chattel slavery of black people. Regardless of whether they're different species, he knew enough then. So the veil of ignorance is not going to help you then, because they were aware of those arguments and they talked about it and they thought about it. So that's not going to distinguish the two groups. Like the point I'm making here is, if it's not enough to be morally wrong, objectively wrong about natural rights in the context of slavery and the American framers, then how could it possibly be enough to abandon the American moral proposition for the modern day leftists, if you grant that DEI is against the American moral proposition, for them to just be wrong about that in telling them having abandoned the American moral proposition? Because that's a bigger error, you would agree, right? Being wrong about slavery as respect to the American moral proposition is way bigger than DEI, correct?
GenZ, were you taking that, or do you want me to take it?
I mean, I had a thought. I was going to go down, but then you ended it with a question. So I don't know. What was the question again?
So the question is, so I'm granting that there are such things as objective moral values. I'm granting that DEI, I guess, is against those for purposes of this current exchange. I'm not going to grant it later on, but for this purpose, assume that.
Wait, you don't grant that there's objective moral values?
I don't even know what it means. I think it's incoherent.
Okay,
the concept.
but that's.
I don't think you could explain it if I pushed you on it. But let's not.
We can get to that, but we can circle back to that. But that's. I mean,
I don't even know what you mean by objective morality.
Okay, but that is inherently rejecting the American moral proposition. But we can. We can circle back to it.
I don't buy that. But even putting that aside, the question is on offer is, assume that DEI is against the objective morality of the American moral proposition, and assume, and you just granted, I think, GenZ, you would also grant slavery is against the American moral proposition.
Yeah, it is. I'm still going to object to this lumping in of, well, the framers were cool with it. The framers were okay with it. I just did a quick Google. The 55 delegates Constitutional Convention, 25 to 30 had slaves. So between slightly less than half or slightly more than half. So once again,
it's part of their compromise, as part of their, whether they're individual slave owners, as part of their compromise, they accepted slavery.
But I think this is a common trope I see on the left a lot, is because there were individuals that did not uphold individually to the moral proposition. Therefore, the entire moral proposition has to be thrown out. When we look at the record, look at the. I know. Okay, I know you're not saying that right now. I'm just saying as a critique of the left generally. But when we're looking at, we have to keep in mind the historical context and circumstance that yes, there were pragmatic compromises that were made. Like the 3/5 compromise was a pragmatic compromise that actually weakened the South's power and their ability to use their slaves to gain more electoral power. We can look at that objectively in a vacuum and say, that's horrible. They're saying black people are 3/5 of a person. But when you actually look at the history of it, it actually was a good compromise that helped accelerate the end of slavery. So I don't like the historical vacuum that we're operating with.
I'm not trying to do that. What I'm saying is merely being wrong about an objective moral proposition related to the American moral proposition isn't enough to know that those people are against the American moral proposition. If you would grant that those people, those framers, are in line with the American moral proposition, notwithstanding the fact that they made the incorrect decision on the American moral proposition at that time, I don't know if you would grant that, then how are we, isn't that a bigger mistake, right? Didn't they make a bigger error relative to the modern day people in favor of DEI? That was my question.
Well, I think that's actually a slightly misleading framing. There were, as GenZ was saying, a large number of founders who were very opposed to slavery and were opposed to it at the founding. And I think if you're asking me, like, is slavery worse than equity in modern DEI? The answer is obviously yes. Slavery is worse. But the point I'm making is not that. The point I'm making is that at the time, there were a group of founders who were trying to abolish something, and it was a struggle, and it took a while, but eventually we succeeded. On the left, you see people trying to cut against natural rights. So while the framers were in an imperfect struggle to abolish slavery in the name of natural rights, the modern left is engaged in the project of eliminating natural rights. So the directionality here matters. What the framers were doing was a struggle to do the right thing morally over time. What the left is doing is struggling to impose immorality in real time. So I think that's a key difference.
as relates these Virginia representatives, the ones that I'm talking about, Madison, Jefferson, and Washington, they were not trying to end slavery. They were trying to preserve slavery. And many of the framers that I'm talking about as the denominator, who you would grant, put aside the framers as an overall metric, but you would never grant that Jefferson, because you're citing the Declaration of Independence, was against the American moral proposition. In no sense was he trying to end slavery. Jefferson didn't try to end slavery.
He was absolutely trying to end slavery. That's why his first draft of the Declaration of Independence included an admonition about slavery, and that was his preferred position. Now, did he live up to that personally? I think obviously there's things he could have done more. I think we could get into that if it's truly necessary. The point I'm making is not that the founders were perfect, or that they understood natural law perfectly, or that they lived up to it perfectly. Pisco, the point I'm making is that they were directionally attempting to learn about natural law and to create a society that abided by natural law. Whereas what the left is doing is attempting to move away from natural law. So the fact that the framers were imperfect and got things wrong isn't the issue. The issue is that the left is going consciously in the other direction on purpose. That's the point.
So to the extent that Jefferson knew that it was against natural law to enslave black people, he was not moving us towards that end of eliminating and proceeding to a society without it.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I just have to jump in there because they're holding these two things as equivalent. You're saying that Jefferson writing the Declaration and setting the moral vision that was relied upon, but in all of the debates that were used that ultimately led to the abolition of slavery, him authoring that moral vision is equivalent to the fact that he personally owned slaves. And those things are, you just brought it, you're saying that he's abandoned it. So how can we take anything of what he says seriously if he's abandoned
the government that he supported, the government that he backed, and the vision that he was promoting across the country, both as a legislator, both as ultimately one of the framers, the first Secretary of State, and then President Jefferson, was fundamentally one that accepted slavery. That was his, and he was not moving our country in a direction of abandoning slavery. That's not what Jefferson is known for at all, and that's not what Jefferson did. And the whole point I'm doing this is, you can't take the American moral proposition like that to get the level of specificity on policies regarding diversity. Because one thing you seem to implicitly understand is whatever the American moral proposition is needs to exist across our time span. It needs to exist and include the framing generation and also potentially people here, even though there are massive disagreements on the individual policy level or on defining what equity or equality or rule of law, what these things mean. Such that it would encompass a moral difference between having slaves and not having slaves. And so any principle that is going to extend geographically and throughout time and unify these disparate groups of people needs to be at some conception broad. And that's why I understand it to be a commitment to rule of law and the Constitution.
Sorry, Ryan, I gotta jump in there because I'm glad I did my research on the historical record to be as prepared as I could be. So you're just making sure I got it straight because you said a lot, which is good. You're making good arguments, but it was that Jefferson basically was pro-slavery and did nothing to stop the institution of slavery.
Yeah, he did nothing of significance, and he supported the Constitution, the document that, even though some rumblings of anti-federalism, but in general him and Madison supported the Constitution. Madison wrote it, and him together, they founded a party together. They in general did not push us towards ending slavery. I mean, they didn't even free their own slaves in their lifetime.
Would it then change your mind if, hypothetically, let's just assume Jefferson were to urge Congress in, 1806 to pass a law banning the importation of slavery, and then Jefferson signed that very law in 1807 to ban the importation of slavery? No. That doesn't count towards taking steps towards ending slavery?
No. The stopping of the importation of slavery is not a move towards ending slavery in the United States. Agree?
No, I'm going to hard disagree, and I think
of course it's a move towards that.
Yeah,
so he was not. So part of the reason why the framers were in favor of keeping slavery in the South is because the slavery was propping up their economy, and they were not looking to end slavery in Virginia. The importation of slavery had particular moral problems related to getting the slaves from Africa, and the ride over was a particular source of moral outrage.
So,
but the actual,
your point is,
they didn't have an eye. Hang on. What I'm going to say is they didn't have an eye. Jefferson didn't have an eye to ultimately ending slavery. That wasn't his aim.
Well, I think we can look at the fact that it was a march over time. It was there were the abolitionists that said no, purely has to all go all right now, and they didn't win because this is a thing. It's pretty baked in from the very beginning of the colonies, and this is not something that was just going to be cold turkey cut off. And so I think the pragmatic view was to do the march of progress, the steps over time, one of which is to cut off the supply of new slaves coming in.
But Jefferson's intent in doing that was not to end the institution of slavery. That wasn't his intent.
I don't know. What do you base that on?
I wanted to, Jen, I didn't know if you wanted to finish your thought there. It sounded like you got cut off. I don't.
Yeah, I have a hypothetical, but I want to ask, like, how are you so definitively concluding that banning the importation of slavery, combined with language where he's in his writings denouncing slavery? Yes, he still owned them personally, and that's a contradiction. I'm agreeing with you there. But how can we match up his writing saying he's denouncing slavery with him taking a huge step towards cutting off the supply of new slaves coming in and saying, well, he didn't care about ending slavery? Like, how are you so confidently concluding that?
Because you can't point to a writing in which Jefferson is saying that, like, I am trying right now to end the institution of slavery in the United States. Because even though he spoke out morally in his writings, and obviously it was a contradiction, there's a distinction in the minds of the framers between importation of slaves and the maintenance, because there was a particular evil associated with the importation of slaves that isn't present in their minds with the maintenance of slavery in the United States. And there were hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of slaves that they were able to, obviously they're having sex and they're having children, and unborn slaves were happening. And so in no sense was the intent of Jefferson ultimately to end slavery.
This just feels like a catch-22.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the degree to which Jefferson himself opposed slavery is relevant to the point overall. The point is simply like the founders disagreed on natural law to such an extent that many of them did to varying degrees support slavery and not extend the supposed founding prospect or whatever to slaves, even though some of them knew, at least enough to say that it was wrong at the time.
That is the ultimate point.
Nonfon, that's very well put, and I'm glad you said that. The issue that I have with this line, which I appreciate the tactic, Pisco, because it lets you be on the offense, but the reality here is, if you look at the directionality of history and what people think, natural law is an objective moral philosophy. You discover it over time. You get better at it. You learn more about it. One of the things we learned in the bloody arc of our history, and it was a really tough lesson, it was a brutal lesson to learn, is that you ought to treat people as individuals. And slavery was wrong because they weren't being treated as individuals. That was not an easy lesson. It took us a long time to learn it, but that is part of natural law. My issue, and reason I bring up equity, is that having learned that lesson, having spent hundreds of years in this bloody pursuit of figuring out what's right and wrong, now the left wants to abandon it. So, I mean, if we can talk all day about the fact that it took the founders longer than maybe I would have preferred to figure this out and to reach consensus on it. The issue I'm pointing out is the modern left is abandoning that lesson, which was a hard-fought one, man. It took us a long time. I don't think we should give it up so quickly.
I don't think that
but again, the point, as I understand it, like Pisco and I are saying, is that the stuff we're bringing up here is sort of evidence that the American moral prospect contains more than just the sort of narrowly defined, like, natural law that is put in the Declaration of Independence. It also includes like the constitutional principles that Pisco mentioned.
And to the extent that there's that being beholden and being committed to the American moral proposition would include such disagreement on vast subjects of such vast moral import, on interracial marriage, on slavery itself, on the prospect of equal rights for women, right? Where does that fit in the framers? The fact that the American moral proposition, as understood by the framers, wouldn't include the vote for women, right? Like that is something that I guess we're discovering now is objectively true, that women should have the vote. But the whole point is, whatever the American moral proposition contains, if you are able to be committed to the American moral proposition, notwithstanding being objectively wrong on issues of insane moral consequence, presumably to most people, then surely it would include being wrong on like DEI or something, especially because, the Constitution itself contains different balances when it comes to like collective responsibility and individual rights. The fact that we have, the takings clause that lets the government eminent domain the fuck out of your private property. But clearly that's a balance that the Constitution struck that balanced individual rights and the need of the government and the collective need. So I think any kind of granularity that you're trying to impose, that a position on DEI makes it incompatible for modern day people to be committed to the American moral proposition, but a position on slavery, that it's fucking amazing to have slaves, or it's fucking amazing for women not to vote, it's fucking amazing for only landowners to be able to vote, that wouldn't disqualify you from the American moral proposition. You're going to have to find a way to have that through line.
Let me put it like this then, because my critique of both of you guys right now is this: the analysis keeps feeling like we're trying to put it into the vacuum instead of understanding the historical circumstances at the time. What is the equivalent modern circumstances that would justify? I'm arguing the historical record. There's justification for it as far as reaching pragmatic compromises because it was what the times called for. What are the pragmatic compromises that are necessary in 2025 that would justify folks on the left embracing DEI and equity, and Joe Biden saying that equity is a centerpiece of his entire administration? What's the pragmatic compromise that's requiring him to do that?
Even if I bought, which I don't, that this kind of equity DEI stuff is, so this is all assuming your framing of the American moral proposition, which I think is fucking stupid. Sorry. I think it's not.
Well, no.
I think it's dumb.
Can you expand on that? Why is it dumb?
I think it's dumb because you're trying to get more narrow and specific than commitment to the Constitution and respect for the rule of law. And anything more narrow, it fails to define the entire denominator.
This is the hollowed out American morality that you're advocating for. You're essentially conflating law with morality. We're not talking about law, Pisco. I'm not talking about what the law requires. Or what we're saying is that our founders had a vision of what morality is. Now, I know, for example, in Nonfon, I don't mean to call you out and correct me if I'm wrong, but like Nonfon doesn't believe in natural rights. He doesn't believe that they are real objective things because he's a utilitarian. That's a very common view on the left. It's not an uncommon view on the left, but it's expressly rejecting American moral philosophy. I don't think you believe in natural rights, Pisco. I think you believe in a lot of other values, but I don't think you believe in natural rights. And I don't think either of you do. But I'm saying is that's the American
I also don't believe in
proposition.
slavery. I also don't believe. So you can point out differences in.
Answer the question. Do you believe in natural rights?
It depends what you mean by natural rights.
No.
It depends what you mean by natural rights.
Objective moral principles that are discoverable.
I don't know what that is. I think it's incoherent. I don't think you're going to be able to define it.
Well, let's just read the declaration. I'm going to read the passage.
Well, no, we grant that some of the framers were natural rights philosophers.
We're saying, do you agree with the proposition that is laid out in the declaration? Just going to quote it verbatim. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you agree
on some readings what those mean? Yeah, it depends on what I understand it to mean, but I agree with what I think is the substance of that, based on not what I take to be natural rights philosophy that I don't adhere to. But of course, that's not the proposition, is whether I adhere to natural rights philosophy. It's what the American moral proposition is. Now, if you're saying that natural rights philosophy is the American moral proposition, that's just how you define it. I mean, you're going to get a lot of language that sounds like that from Democrats these days and from the left wing. And so I'm not, you're going to have to make an empirical case that the left has abandoned natural rights philosophy to that extent, or that the right has embraced natural rights philosophy. And again, just to be 100% clear, what we're talking about, GenZAttorney said one of the necessary conditions, or I guess one of the main ways to know that you're a part of the American moral proposition and natural rights or whatever, is belief in God. And if belief in God is necessary to the American moral proposition, then we just have a different notion of what that is.
Well, what's necessary?
And I want to be clear as well. When I say I don't believe in natural rights, I simply mean I don't believe they are sort of intrinsically valuable in their own right. But I do believe they are very incredibly useful heuristics that should be codified in law, for example. And if you want to, and I do think the American moral proposition does entail some sort of adherence to the Constitution, to these rights that we have, enshrined in law, because I think they are useful heuristics. I think they are rights that we should all respect. I'm simply saying I don't believe they are the intrinsically valuable things in and of themselves.
Yeah, but the founders thought that these were self-evident, and what they meant by self-evident in that time period is that they meant that these were essentially that we have a moral sense and that there are objective moral facts about people, about the universe. There are objective moral laws, objective moral rights, which can be discovered by people because of our moral sense. They would have used the language like the moral laws written on our hearts. Now, it is possible to get to that position without belief in God. It is philosophically somewhat difficult. I've met people who attempt to do it, but it's a bit more complicated. But it's tricky.
So are you saying if you don't
believe in God,
I agree, but it seems like
easy. If you believe in God, it's like the default state is that this is accurate. But if you don't believe in God, I don't think it's impossible for an atheist to get there, but I think it's really hard. The philosophy is difficult.
So are you saying that unless you believe in objective morality, you don't stand for the American moral proposition?
Yeah, that's what the objective. The American moral proposition is that these are objective.
I think that is
clear, but not just objective morality, but also objective morality based on natural rights. It can't be objective.
Yeah, that is the American moral proposition.
So we just have we understand those terms differently. I understand that term differently. To think that we would understand the American moral proposition to be so specific to areas, I guess, of meta ethics that 99% of the American people couldn't even describe, what objective morality is or objective ethics or have this kind of meta ethical discussion. I think that's preposterously narrow, and it's not how I understand the American moral proposition. And I don't think most people would even be able to. You'd probably need to have some good grounding in philosophy to even be able to elaborate that. And so on that reading, given that most of the American people are ignorant of what it is the fuck you're talking about, how can you say that that's what that term means or ought to mean?
Because maybe I'm a philosophy scrub, maybe. But when I read this declaration, and I don't see this as laying out this ultra complicated, ultra nuanced framework that you have to have this great philosophical understanding to understand. No, it's a very short simplification of there are rights and they exist. They pre-exist us. They're bestowed on us by a creator. And that's why I say the first thing I laid out was a belief in a God. I think when you read the declaration, it literally says they are all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their creator. So I think it is a requirement as far as the moral proposition that America is laying out, that you have to acknowledge that where these rights come from, because otherwise, then we're just devolving into sociological positivism, and just the law is just what we say. It's not something that pre-exists, which runs completely counter to the founders and all of their reliance on the Bible, reliance on Blackstone, and Scottish common law realism. Did I get that right, Ryan?
Yeah, and I think the key point there is that the differentiation between an objective moral system and a subjective one in what we're talking about here is that morality is not determined by consensus. In a culturally relative moral system, right? If the people voted for slavery, then slavery would be morally good because they voted for it. The people agreed on it. In an objective moral system, there are things that are right and things that are wrong. Even if the people vote to do something immoral, it's still wrong.
Wait. So, why don't we grant your semantics and just say, what's your case that leftists don't believe in objective morality?
Okay. Well, let's start with neither of you do, right?
Well, you agree that's not.
That
doesn't make your case.
You've come here to argue the proposition. You disagree with it.
We're in the weeds on this philosophy conversations. I think objective morality is incoherent as a philosophical notion. I don't even understand what it means. But to put that aside, what's your case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
Okay, so we'll start with that. We have a panel of 4. Both people on the left.
I would put. I've not developed a super strong opinion on it, but I would put probably 60% credence in more realism. But
okay, but you don't. Oh, sorry, yeah, because you're a utilitarian, but you don't. So you don't believe in natural law, but you think that it's.
I believe you can be. Sorry.
So wait. Objective morality has to do with meta ethics. You could be a utilitarian and be an objective moralist.
Yeah, you can.
So there's nothing inconsistent about him being a utilitarian and a moral realist.
Yeah, I have a stance independent reason, that being the maximization of positive qualia.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to drill on. I think if I understand Nonfon's position correctly, he is unsure, but he thinks objective morality is true, but then he, as a utilitarian, does not think that natural law is real. He thinks it's a heuristic. That's what I think.
So my stance independent reason for objective morality would be the sort of maximization of positive qualia of sentient experience. It would not be the stance of independent reason would not be natural rights.
Okay.
So what's the case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
Yeah. So I think that the case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality, in particular, doesn't believe in natural law, is that if you look at the statements of left-leaning politicians and you look at the policies they've implemented as a result, they are cutting the other way. You can tell from their behavior.
You can't tell their meta-ethical position by their positions on issues.
Of course you can.
How can you tell their meta-ethical position by looking at their issues?
Okay, so here's Senator Tim Kaine before the Senate. The statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baas, Jews, Christians.
Let's talk about rights, not objective morality.
Natural law is a more specific claim than objective rights. Objective morality is a broad
so I'm just going to ask
category.
you. So first, I'm going to ask you: do you have a case? It's okay if you don't have a case, and maybe it's more specific than natural rights. Do you have a case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
I don't think that's the case we're making. No, we're saying natural law specifically.
So natural law, which to you means what?
An objective moral truth. It is objective, discoverable moral truths about humans and human natures.
Objective. Okay, that sounds like it's grounded back down to objective morality.
No, because in Nonfon's system, there are no laws. Like a utilitarian, like for example, I'm not trying to pick on you, Nonfon, but to a utilitarian, for example, if you said, if we abolished the right to property. In fact, this came up in my debate with the Econo Boy. If we abolished the right to property, but I could make an empirical case that everyone would be happier and their lives would be better and they would just be like smiling in sunshines. Basically, I could guarantee that utility would increase by abolishing property. They would do it for the right to property. Because
that's his normative ethical view, not his meta-ethical view. So he could be a utilitarian and be an objective moralist.
Yeah, but again, he's not a natural rights theorist.
Because you grounded out natural rights into objective morality, and so it's circular.
It's not.
The natural rights
a natural rights theorist would say you have a right to property. The utility is irrelevant to me. Like the fact that you were trying to abolish property is morally wrong. Flat stop. It is against natural law. Therefore, we ought not do it regardless of the outcome.
That sounds like what you're suggesting is that utilitarianism is counter to natural rights philosophy. Some kind of like. Okay, but then it just sounds like it's excising the objectiveness of it. Meta-ethical
utilitarianism is a school of objective philosophy that is wrong, and natural law is a theory of objective moral philosophy that is correct. That's the point I'm making. Like they're both within the same umbrella term of objective moral philosophies. One is just wrong and the other is right. But it's the fact that he's within the same umbrella framework doesn't mean that I'm not going to quibble about that.
Okay, but then I don't understand. Like, you could take a threshold utilitarian view or some kind of rule utilitarian view that recognizes rights as or a threshold deontological view, and the framers would all understand that, right? Like the framers would understand that, for example, in the takings clause, that when there's particular need arises, you can take people's property. When particular need arises, you can draft them into the military. When particular needs arises, you can, fucking go lower on rights. And so any kind of view of, that utilitarianism or some kind of threshold system, that deontological system is incompatible with natural rights would just you just face and crash in that the framers all understood that sometimes governments needed to intrude on rights, if for no other reason, right? Like the Declaration of Independence, they were willing to abide a lot of rights infringements from the king. It wasn't until it reached a certain threshold that they said no. So yeah, I think anything that you're going to say that a threshold view, a threshold normative view, is incompatible with natural rights is going to run into the practice and belief of the framers, which was to establish systems to bring back rights in times of emergency.
Well, I think we're getting kind of a feel to the prompt. I want to try and narrow this in. Specific question. So obviously we've read the Declaration. I'm not going to read the passage again, but I think we can all agree, according to the founders, that our rights they pre-exist government and they come from God. We all agree that's at least what they were saying, right?
Yeah, the framers had a bunch of beliefs, some of which we agree with and some of which we don't.
Okay, and so, but now we're saying that, well, let me just ask this. If rights don't come from a creator, for you guys, you two, both, where do they come from?
Why is that relevant to the proposition?
Because in the moral proposition, the affirmative case that's made is that rights pre-exist government, and the government is constituted to protect those rights. They are negative rights. The modern left view. Wait, real quick. The modern left view is that there are a bunch of positive rights, whether it's food, housing, healthcare, anything you can name is a right now, according to the left. I made a tweet the other day. The left declares rights like Michael Scott declares bankruptcy. And so if that's what the left is doing now, declaring all these positive rights, is that a contradiction with the founders' view of negative rights?
Wait, what's the contradiction between negative and positive rights?
Because the government exists, is constituted to protect these inalienable negative rights, things that they're abstract. It's not a tangible physical thing. It is my right to not be killed. I'm
just asking you said it was a contradiction. What is the proposition in its negation that's entailed by that view?
Yes, because a negative right, that's what I was saying. Negative right is abstract, something that just is, I have a right to not be killed. I have a right to not be stolen from, a right to not be stabbed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The right to healthcare necessarily requires that you are mandating, compelling someone else to provide a service. You're compelling them. So
when you say necessarily, you mean logically necessarily entails?
Honestly, I don't even know what the distinction is there. I don't want to get bogged down with that.
So I'm asking, when you say necessarily guaranteeing healthcare infringes on someone's rights, I'm asking, when you say it necessarily does, you mean logically it entails it?
Directly or indirectly, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Pisco, this is maximum quibbling. He's saying that if you have a right to healthcare, the government must provide it to you, which means the government must be able to get someone to give you the healthcare. Like it's not.
No, I'm asking
that's
whether
not logically though.
Hang on. He said that there was a contradiction. I take that to be a logical contradiction between espousing positive rights and espousing negative rights at the same time. And I'm asking what that contradiction is. And he brings up an example, which is healthcare. And he says, if you promise healthcare to people, that means that you're violating some right. I'm asking, where is that logical entailment? And does he mean that it's not logically required? And if he doesn't mean that, then there's no contradiction.
So the way I interpret this entire issue is the negative right is the right to be protected from. The positive right is the right to. The right to
I understand that. Yes.
Agreed.
Okay. And I'm saying that is a contradiction.
What's the contradiction?
Hold on, let him finish. Go ahead.
I guess the really best way I can explain it is that if you're providing an affirmative right to something, what if no one wants to give it? How do you then provide that right?
That's a question. That's not a contradiction. I'm asking you what the contradiction is.
I'm saying the answer to that question is the contradiction. You have to compel it. No one. You don't have to. I don't have to be compelled to not be killed. It's just
so if I give you a possibility in which where it's all voluntary, then there's no right to violation, correct? So it's not. There's no necessary contradiction.
If you can create that system, is that a real system that's going to get created? Though it seems.
I'm asking what the contradiction is, and I'm asking in that example there would not be any kind of right separation, correct?
In a hypothetical that's impossible to create.
So when you say there's a contradiction, that's incorrect, right?
No, I'm still going to disagree because I'm not going to grant a hypothetical that's impossible to exist as
it's impossible to guarantee a healthcare right where all the transactions by which the government guarantees healthcare are voluntary. That's impossible.
Yeah, I would say so.
What's the logical contradiction by that world?
I think we're getting bogged down.
My question you say it's impossible. Do you mean it's logically impossible?
we can go down.
You use these words like contradiction and it's I'm like, what's the contradiction? And you're mad that I'm like following down this line because there's no contradiction. You could hold to negative rights and positive rights. There's no contradiction there.
My question was, where do rights come from? I'm asking. That was my question.
Why is that relevant? Why is that relevant to the proposition? Our belief.
It's deeply relevant because when you sorry, Nonfon, did I interrupt you? Go ahead.
No. Just for Gen Z, I want to be clear. For one, I think that if pushed far enough, both of you would probably subscribe to some type of threshold position where you would say, there would be a threshold at which some minor rights violation is acceptable in order to, have some overwhelming benefit to the rest of the population or whatever. And secondly, I think, again, the disagreement is over what the American moral prospect is, whether or not it's so narrow as to only include God-given inalienable rights, which is something, as Pisco said, I don't even think 99% of the population could even lay out fully, and I think if you push them far enough, they probably would have some utilitarian
like, yeah, of
intuitions
course,
as well.
If there was an alien invasion, we would be okay in like restricting your right to go outside. And of course, if there were like a fucking like China invaded, you could do a bunch of stuff. Like everyone would immediately subscribe to it. So would the framers, by the way. Like just be honest, the Constitution is more
the fact that you want a government at all, like suggests that
right.
I wanted to let Ryan go ahead, Ryan.
What you're getting at is a distinction between like our framers' philosophy and like an ANCAP philosophy, right? So if you believe that there can be no infringement of natural rights at all, you end up being an ANCAP or an anarcho-objectivist because the government itself is an infringement. What our founders laid out in the Declaration of Independence was that natural rights ought be maximized, infringement ought be minimized, and Nonfon's right. That does not mean there's going to be zero infringement at all times. The very fact the government exists is itself an infringement. So I think you're correct, Nonfon. But the goal is to maximize the umbrella of natural rights for Americans. That's what the founders were talking about when they wrote the document. So the example that
the point is
the
that
reason I started with Gen Z.
Hold on. Let Ryan finish, please.
The reason I started with equity, and I think equity is like a good segue into like the problems that the modern left has, is that in service of equity, the left has expressly adopted policies that require not treating people as individuals. They've established quotas based off of race, based off of DEI. They've established different systems by which government money is allocated on the basis of race. And this is something that we would find reprehensible from the idea that you should treat people as individuals. You ought not treat them as members of groups. Yet the left is doing it on purpose now, today, in the year 2020, they were doing it, not in the distant past. Right now, they were doing it. And they were doing it because there's a strain of thought that became very popular. It was championed by Ibram X. Kendi, who famously said, the only remedy to past discrimination is current discrimination. And that's what the left advocated for. They're advocating for actual discrimination today, which is a clear rights violation, not in the distant past, but a rights violation that we know is wrong and shouldn't happen.
Was it a rights deprivation after the passage of the 14th Amendment when many governments were instituting a lot of these race-based policies?
Is there any universe where I started talking about equity at the beginning of this conversation?
Yeah.
We've engaged in endless side quests of yours. Is there any point in this conversation where you are actually going to address the merits of equity?
I'm addressing it right. But no, I'm addressing whether. Whether I'm addressing whether or not.
You segue later. Right now, Pisco. Do you think?
Because you're uncomfortable.
Part of the American moral proposition to purposefully discriminate against people on the basis of race, ethnicity, or gender?
I think it's compatible with the American moral proposition. That's
okay. So
let me tell you why. Wait. Can I explain why?
Hold on. Let's all woosah. All right. Okay. Was there a clarification with that, Ryan, that you wanted to?
Sorry.
So, I think I think my reflection is reflecting. But Ryan, I apologize. Was there a clarification to your question that you wanted to add in there before he answers?
No, I was just going to merely point out that that is precisely the problem. Pisco thinks it is in today's day and age acceptable to discriminate on the basis of these characteristics. That's what you just said.
What a weasel piece of shit.
It's what you just said.
Wait, no. You asked whether it's consistent with the American moral proposition. Yeah. I think that slavery is consistent with the American moral proposition. You have to.
You're wrong.
So do you understand, right? Like when you say that you think it's acceptable to have racial discrimination, that is fucked up because that's not the belief I hold. What you were asking me was whether
voted for the party that did it.
No, hang on. So we're not here to discuss whether DEI is right or wrong. Do you agree with that?
Actually, we are here to discuss it.
The
American moral proposition.
Hold on.
It's a moral proposition. When I say that something is immoral, I'm saying it's wrong. So of course, when I point out that something is immoral, we're here to talk about if it's wrong.
No,
what the fuck are you talking about?
What
are we talking about?
Wait a second.
And I am agreeable based on the framework of especially based on everybody's prompts that they provided, the DEI, you had collectivism built in, the equity, so on and so forth. I am agreeable that the DEI conversation, as a side quest-ish, would be packed into that conversation. It makes sense.
What is absurd is the notion that this is a conversation about whether DEI is correct or incorrect. There's a phrase in the proposition, which is the American moral proposition. That is not equivalent to Pisco's overall moral look on everything. When I'm telling you that the American moral proposition would include things like slavery, would include things like segregation, would include things like denying women the right to vote, that just is an understanding of what I mean by American moral proposition. And what I mean by American moral proposition is something far, far more general than my specific moral outlook. Of course, I think slavery is wrong. But that just because I think slavery is wrong doesn't mean that I think it isn't consistent with the American moral proposition as I understand it. All that I think the American moral proposition is something else, and that is commitment to the Constitution and rule of law. That's all and so when I say something like horrible policies are consistent with American moral proposition, like policies, for example, letting out all the criminals is consistent with the American moral proposition. Getting rid of all murder laws is consistent with the American moral proposition. That just means that I have a different notion of what American moral proposition is. What you did was fucking sneaky. What you said is, well, because I took this view of the American moral proposition, which is much broader and grander, which includes things like slavery and things like, segregation, is you said, well, because you think it's consistent with this principle that you laid out, therefore Pisco's in favor of it, and therefore you're a bad person. And now you've converted the proposition, which is about the American moral proposition, to Pisco's a bad guy.
No.
Fucking sneaky rat.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
First of all, Pisco, you have said, and I think you're dead wrong about what the American moral proposition is, but you have said that the American moral proposition is all these horrible things that include slavery and segregation, et cetera,
compatible.
And that your moral philosophy is different and better, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no. Sorry.
It's subsumed in it. Abandoned the American proposition. I
haven't abandoned that.
The American moral proposition
you fucking idiot.
It.
Ryan. No.
Well, I think this all ties back. If I can just maybe settle everyone down, and I'll just be the dumb blonde on the screen. But I think this tied back to GenZAttorney saying that the contradiction between the negative and the positive rights, and that would also tie in with the DEI, the collectivism. We're kind of going in a lot of different realms here.
But real quick.
Wait. I want to respond to what he just said. So my moral philosophy includes a dedication to the American moral proposition, but it's not an exhaustive thing, right? So like the American moral proposition is just one component of my personal philosophy, but just the American moral proposition isn't enough to get you to good government. That when I say that I think that my personal morality is like preferable to one that is only dedicated to the rule of law, yeah, I want more than that. But it's just an understanding of what these terms mean. And so when you say I've abandoned the American moral proposition, that's also sneaky. Me saying the American moral proposition is not comprehensive of my entire philosophical outlook is just me acknowledging that my personal morality isn't the American moral proposition. They're not coextensive, and neither is yours. And so, of course, that my ethics is more than just the American moral proposition. You seem to be taking the view that the American moral proposition is whatever Ryan thinks. I don't think that. I think that it is a term, you just brought up, and I'm telling you how I understand it, but it doesn't subsume my entire moral outlook. Of course not.
So you just used the word sneaky 3 times, and I have to say, I don't think either me or Ryan have done anything as sneaky as what you just said in 2 answers ago. That's why I wanted to jump in, but Ryan really wanted to go, was that you attributed to us that our view is so granular that we think that slavery and Jim Crow is compatible with the American moral proposition. I don't think that. Ryan, real quick, pop quiz. Do you think that slavery and Jim Crow are compatible with the American moral proposition? Okay, yeah, so that you just snuck that in real slick there. So I don't think anything that we've said.
I don't think you understand my point there. I can respond if you want.
Hold on.
Let him make his point.
No, the point isn't that you consider those things
were you
to
done?
be.
Oh yeah.
Okay. The point isn't that I was attributing that you thought that those things are included in the American moral proposition. The point is, in fact, the opposite, is the fact that someone could be so counter to the American moral proposition, to be in favor of something as reprehensible as slavery, and still be in support of the American moral proposition as you see it, shows you that a gross departure from the American moral proposition isn't enough to abandon it. And so why is it the case that a gross departure in the sense of slavery isn't enough to abandon it, but a gross departure in the sense of DEI, assuming that DEI is a gross departure, would be enough to abandon it? So you
this is great.
Totally misunderstood why I brought that up. It's the exact opposite implication.
This brings me back to a question I had earlier. We pivoted away from it, but this is my same critique. I'm gonna make it again. You keep making this criticism of the founders when I'm saying it's a pragmatic compromise that was made at the time, that you can be both in support of the American moral proposition and also be personally inconsistent with it. I don't think that's a hard pill to swallow at all. I think it's completely consistent with the historical record. I've yet to hear from you how the modern the people that we're saying things like DEI, things like equity, once again, Joe Biden placing at the center of his administration, openly saying so. Equity will run through everything that he does. What is the pragmatic compromise, the evolution of understanding that would justify that flagrant opposition to the moral proposition?
You're basically saying like they had an excuse, right? The founders had an excuse that it was pragmatically needed at the time. And so that distinguishes the modern day people who don't have a pragmatic.
Pisco, it's so much simpler than that. Abolishing a system.
Let me finish. So
no, we've done this like fucking 5 times. We've done this loop.
We're not getting anywhere.
Okay, interrupting. Go.
Yeah. It is obviously different to attempt to abolish slavery, even if it takes a long time, even if it's imperfect, even if I wish it would have gone faster. But that movement, the directionality towards abolishing slavery, is very different than if somebody tried to institute slavery today. It's much worse if you try to do it today, because we've already learned this lesson. We've already learned this moral truth that slavery is wrong. The problem, as I explained earlier, with the modern left and the equity movement is that we've learned we have an obligation to treat each other as individuals, and the left is now treating people on the basis of group identity. And they're doing it openly, and they're trying to institute it into law. So yes, that is a huge problem. I've noticed you've never defended it because it's a tough fucking thing to defend. But if you'd like to defend it, now is your opportunity to do so.
So is the proposition, is DEI right or wrong under my lights?
No,
you understand
the
that?
proposition
So
is
why
that
would it be? Why would it be relevant? Wait. Let me respond to that. So Ryan wants to dodge the proposition of the debate, which is whether the left has abandoned the American moral proposition, and turn this into debate whether under Pisco, under your lights, would you defend DEI? But that's not the proposition of the debate. And I'm going to now watch you twist yourself in a pretzel to discuss why my ethical outlook on DEI is relevant to the proposition. Go.
Well, no, you've already said that you disagree with the American moral proposition, but let's assume.
No, I didn't. Wait. No, I fucking didn't, you liar.
Hold steady and say, let's assume for the sake of this question that I'm right about what the American moral proposition is. Like that, my definition is the correct one.
I don't even know what it means for a definition to be correct. Okay. What do you mean by that?
The moral proposition is what.
What do you mean by definition to be correct? I don't know what you mean when you say assume my definition is correct.
It is the correct definition.
How can definitions be true? Definitions are not propositions. Definitions are not truth apt. A definition is not truth apt.
Hold up. So it's okay to accept for purposes of moving the conversation. We just accept his definition of these things and work with those words and terms.
No, I can understand your argument on your own lights and what you mean by the term, American moral proposition, but it doesn't mean that your definition is correct. I don't even understand what that means. But because I don't have this realist view that like the objective meaning of words is there to be discovered. But if what you mean is something by American moral proposition, I've been doing that this entire time. I don't grant that what you mean is correct. I've been trying to use your own logic as an internal critique.
Okay. The question Jesus, it's pulling teeth to even get you to the point where I can ask you a question. But assuming that the version of the American proposition that Gen Z and I have presented tonight is the correct one, for the sake of argument, for the sake of this question, would equity be a rights violation, therefore wrong, under that view?
It's a tautology. You're asking if my definition is correct, which includes equity not being under natural rights, then would it be the case? It's tautologically correct. It's trivially true that if your view is,
you're saying because the part that I said that it's a violation of is that we have a moral obligation to treat each other as individuals, not as members of groups, and you're saying that tautologically equity is a violation of that principle.
No, taking on your view of natural rights and your view as expressive natural rights, it just follows tautologically that you're correct. You're assuming you're correct in your premise. And so you're saying,
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
What I'm asking is, if we assume that we have a moral obligation to treat each other as individuals, which I believe is true, but I think that's true. But if we assume that's true, is the modern day equity principle
and if that's
wrong?
all you assume,
if you have an obligation to treat each other as individuals, is it then wrong to discriminate on the basis of race?
Not necessarily, no, because I think under your lights you would accept. Wait. I think I'm answering your question.
Okay, go ahead.
I think taking your view that it's not necessarily, by necessarily I mean logically necessary, that it would entail some rights deprivation because you're committed to allowing racial discrimination in some contexts.
Pisco, if you have a moral obligation to treat someone as an individual, you're saying it is then acceptable to then treat them differently on your the basis
view
of race.
On your view, in some cases, yes. Wait, and that's why I was going. You soyed out, but that's why I was going to the 1860s because, on your view, you think it is acceptable sometimes. Correct?
Not today.
Correct?
Not today.
No, wait, we'll get to that. But first,
no, I'm asking you today.
Wait. Can we just grant that in 1860 it was okay?
For what reason? Lay out your case.
Wait, for the reason of understanding your view about what equality entails.
What specific example are you referring to?
So you would agree that there were race-based policies to benefit Black people post-Civil War that you would think were not rights deprivations?
Depends on which policies you're talking about.
So does depends mean yes, there were some?
I think he's asking for clarification.
Yeah, I'm asking for clarification.
No.
Which, give me a policy.
So, for example, policies of handing over property to slave owners, not fully everywhere that happened, but so former slaves, giving them disproportionately benefit through installing leaders that were specifically beneficial to Black voters.
Is this property? The property you're mentioning, is that owned by somebody else, or was it just unclaimed, unowned property? It's like, here's your plot of land, go crazy.
Yeah, race-based policies to give freed slaves and their descendants benefits.
But that's not treating someone differently on the basis of race.
Integrating them into society.
That's treating them differently on the basis of the injury they suffered, which is an individual. That's treating them as an individual.
Also,
you're saying you personally were a slave. We personally give you land. That's not a group-based policy.
Okay, if that's not group-based discrimination, then under segregation, when those forms of persecution persisted in some fashion, same answer, right? Not discrimination on the basis of race because the discrimination persisted.
Give me what's the policy?
So, for example, forced integration in schools and busing Black kids into white and richer neighborhoods, benefiting people on the basis of race, making distinctions and categories on the basis of race.
Well, what they were doing there is they were prohibiting other people from not treating people as individuals.
And basically, an anti-subjugation rationale is
no, but if the moral principle is you ought to treat people as individuals, segregation does not treat people as individuals. Abolishing segregation is the government stepping in to enforce the moral right that people ought to treat each other as individuals.
Right. So there was discrimination, and to address that discrimination, the government instituted policies policies that disproportionately benefited Black people. Correct.
It's disproportionate benefit has nothing to do with anything I said.
The intention was to help Black people, wasn't it?
Nothing to do with it. The intention to benefit Black people has nothing to do with anything I've said. What I've said is that you can't treat people differently on the basis of their group identity.
Weren't they? Wait. So I'll ask you. Is what happened in the aftermath of segregation treating Black people differently?
No, it's treating them the same.
Wait. Hang on a second.
It used to be that you had the Black counter and the white counter. Now everybody gets to go to the same counter. You are making it so that everyone is being treated the same. Pisco.
By addressing. Hang on a second. By having the policies with their explicit aim to help Black people, and policies where you were not eligible if you were a white person, or you didn't get the benefit of that if you were a white person, right? You didn't get the benefit of the state intervening to make sure that you were going to good schools when you had the forced integration on behalf of the state. That was them treating Black kids differently than white kids, correct?
It was treating them as individuals. Everybody has the same right.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Let's flash forward. Compare that. Compare that.
You have to grant it first, and then we can move on.
Compare that to what Biden did, where you have in this era, you say, okay, It used to be the case that a store was allowed to have a black counter and a white counter. Now we're saying, no, that's illegal. Store must treat everyone as individuals. Fast forward, in the Biden administration, they had policies expressly where they said, we will not give this money to white men.
Wait a second.
You don't see distinction there?
Whether I grant a distinction or not, you have to grant the first case that they were treating black kids differently in the 1960s and for integration. They were. Obviously, they were.
I understand. Maybe
I
can offer a translation for you, Ryan. I think because Ryan, yours is a tiered level of movement that moved along the way to get them to individuality, right? Whereas Pisco, you're piecemealing it and looking just at one time frame at a time.
I'm basically saying, I think you're tracking, Sarah. What I'm saying is, like, on his view, there are some constitutional justifications, some moral justifications to treat black people differently. And one of those views, we can do a more trivial one, I think, where he would grant it immediately. But one of those is to repair past discrimination, to basically account for discrimination that occurred in the past. And I'm basically trying to get him to agree with that principle, that his view would accept, in some cases, treating black people differently abstractly to repair past discrimination. I'm trying to get him to grant that specific proposition.
Well, and I think if I may, I want to try to cool down the temperature. I think Ryan is saying because of that moral proposition originally in our foundation, in the framework, we were able to, Supreme Court, look at that and interpret and say, you know what? No, that is wrong. Let's move forward in this direction instead. So I think what he's saying is it was built in. We just weren't applying it correctly at the time.
And
I could be wrong.
And that's what I'll build on that, because that's one of my main, I've said it earlier, that's one of the main tropes I see down on the left, is because there are individual failings, individual instances we can point to where the moral proposition is not being upheld. Therefore, that is now the case that, well, we should disregard the moral proposition entirely and build entire political movements around things like equity, around things like DEI, around things like institutional changes, like whether they're talking about get rid of the filibuster, pack the Supreme Court. Like, these are all justified now because we can point to, oh, well, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. And I think just because, and when we look at all the the historical record, look at all of the debates of all the people that were pushing the society forward and trying to get everyone to the equal playing field, they kept quoting back to the moral proposition. They were saying America has set out this vision and we're not living up to it. We need to live up to it. They were not saying America was always sucked and we need to tear it all down.
No, I'm not doing that. I look up to these framers, even people like Jefferson who owned slaves. And obviously Washington, these people. I'm not just trying to shit on our history and say, oh, because we were never true to our values, therefore, the values are meaningless. I'm not a fucking nihilist. I'm not doing that at all. What I'm doing is saying, on your view, abandoning the moral proposition doesn't entail having horrible views, right? Like, you could have horrible views that are in the moment in which they're held horrible, and it doesn't entail you leaving the American moral proposition or abandoning it. And likewise, you can take the view that disproportionately treating black people better than white people in some contexts is acceptable for certain kinds of injuries, for example, past discrimination, and it doesn't entail you abandoning the American moral proposition. That is to underscore, not that we don't have like some past that is worth respecting. I think that we do. But to underscore the untenability of your position, that mere adherence to DEI means that you've abandoned the American moral proposition. If the American moral proposition can be not abandoned by holding to slavery, holding to repairing past wrongs in the context of discrimination, I don't understand why DEI raises to such a level that it entails abandoning the moral proposition. It just seems like a reductio ad absurdum.
Because it's the question I asked. I still don't think I have an answer to it. What is the pragmatic historical context of 2020, 2025 that justifies these broad government-based redress, that DEI and equity is the purpose of it is redress.
Yeah. So their view. So I'll respond to that. So you might disagree with this view, but I don't think you can say it's not sincerely held. Is an anti-subjugation rationale that basically we haven't done the full work of post-Reconstruction and post-segregation in eliminating these sort of emblems of discrimination, legal discrimination that existed, that we haven't done the job. We haven't finished the job of that yet. Now, I think that a lot of that is overstated. I don't agree with a lot of the fucking woke shit. I actually lost some friends in college because I was saying, you should be able to wear a sombrero if you're a white guy. You should be able to fucking, like, I don't go full on the way. But, like, what I don't see is how that position, the position that, like, Black people are still suffering under the legacy of discrimination that you would grant in the 60s, you would grant post-Reconstruction, that entails that you're abandoning the moral proposition, but like slavery, owning people at a time when people knew it was wrong, where the people who framed the Constitution knew it was wrong, that position is compatible with the American proposition as you see it, or not abandoning the American moral proposition, just to be clear.
Just to see, right, and let's hopefully, I think we'll agree on this point, but in the last 10 years, when woke DEI really, became this mainstay, there's not been any sort of comparable subjugation that's happened in the last 10 years that is anywhere near comparable to slavery.
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, okay, I thought we would agree on that. So then how it's a lot more nebulous, a lot more abstract, even given the most charitable interpretation of the grievance that's being claimed right now, it still is so abstract and nebulous. I just don't, and we see it too with all the policies that get proposed. The enforceability is just a complete nightmare. And so if you can't enforce it, you can't identify who's injured, who's aggrieved, how do you actually redress it?
No,
but we're going to try it anyway with these.
I disagree with
programs.
reparations. I think that reparations are a horrible idea as a policy right now. I think that like some of these ideas will never, are not good, should not be proposed. I'm not in agreement with getting rid of the police because of DEI stuff or because, they're all racist or anything like that. So I'm not committed to some of these views. All I'm saying is there's room for reasonable disagreement, that everyone can argue for this stuff and still be committed to the American moral proposition. And what I mean by that is just simply that we're all playing by the same structure and rules. That's what I take the American moral proposition to be. Not some specific view on race or equity or equality or even rights, right? Not even a particular view on what liberty is, but that we're committed to a process and structure, namely the Constitution and the rule of law, in which we navigate these different issues. So someone could be committed to the American moral proposition and be a horrible person advocating for horrible things, right? Like, I think that in many ways, yes, reprehensible policies are compatible with the American moral proposition. That's why I take Ryan's accusation that I've abandoned the American moral proposition to be so offensive, is because I haven't. I just don't think that everything is subsumed under the American moral proposition, that all morality is under it.
So on your view, as you've just described, I'm just trying to make sure I understand what it is. Like, let's say Nick Fuentes and his buddies managed to get a sufficient consensus, and they used legal processes. They used, they amended the Constitution correctly. They did everything right by the rule of law, and they reinstated slavery. That would be within the American moral proposition as you understand it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that this is I think, why we have this core division right now within our society, because if you view the American proposition as this kind of hollow legalistic thing, which is operate by the instruction manual, follow the Constitution, with no actual moral guidance, no moral framework, no actually understanding of what ordered liberty would be or why we're doing this. The whole point of having liberty is to have people do the right thing, is to give them the opportunity to do the right thing. There is a moral framework to our nation. And my frustration is that when people abandon it, they always think that they get to decide what comes next, right? Whenever I talk to a really extreme far left, communist type, they'll say we need to get rid of American history. We need to get rid of all this stuff so that we can get the utopian. But when you talk to a extreme Christian nationalists, they're going to say the same thing. We need to get rid of the American proposition so that we can put in religious purity tests so that only Christians can hold office. The problem is both those things are technically legal under the Constitution if you can get the votes, but they're wrong. And they're wrong because there actually is a moral framework that our founders set forth for us. It's not a value neutral proposition. And I think the path that the left is on, which I think you actually described it very well, is moving away from that into this value neutral proposition where anything goes. And it becomes incredible. It becomes dangerous very fast.
It's not value neutral. I mean, this is insanity. The reason why I'm saying that the American moral proposition is elastic enough to include horrible things is because you can't make sense of what that would mean across time and the framers, other than a commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law. Because if it's on particular views, right? If all of a sudden supporting slavery is not compatible with that, then you have to throw away the universality of it across time, which you're clearly appealing to.
No, you're just confusing.
Your view is so narrow.
Let me finish,
Let him
please.
finish. Let him finish.
And it's not something like objective morality or like this push towards natural rights, especially because most fucking people don't know what the fuck that means. And this has never been universally held that like meta-ethical positions. And so you're optics maxing right now by saying, oh my God, he thinks that it's compatible because you think the audience is too stupid to be like, I'm in favor of slavery or something. I'm just merely saying that the tethering line, the connective tissue between us and the framing generation is our commitment to the Constitution and a process and a structure, because anything more specific than that all of a sudden untethers you completely from the founding generation, because they had fucking horrible views about all sorts of shit. And I'm not this person that like therefore thinks they should all be thrown out, but I'm just trying to make sense of this word.
No, I think what's
I apologize. I just wanted to let everyone know we got about 15 more minutes left, so I just want to make sure you start tying your ends up if you need to. And Nonfon and GenZ, I wanted to make sure you felt like you had time. So if you did want to jump in, this is your chance. Ryan, back to you.
I'll back off and let one of them jump in, and then I can respond.
Let me try, because I really want to get this other topic, and I know we're winding down. It's probably take a lot more time than we have time left for. But I wanted to focus in on this quote from Federalist 51, this whole idea that, quote, justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. And of course, we've talked a lot about equity and talked a lot about DEI. But I think we need to talk some about the court system and the role that the court system is supposed to play underneath the American moral proposition. And maybe you all disagree. I think it should basically serve as this kind of outside referee of sorts that is able to weigh in on conflicts and resolve them in the way that's consistent with the Constitution. Does anyone disagree with that summary?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by that. Is what you mean by that that's part of natural rights? That how the courts are set up are a component of natural rights? I'm
appealing more to
my own ethics on the courts. That's not the proposition.
No, I'm appealing to the framers setting out these ideas of separation of powers, checks and balances, and basically those two principles: separation of powers.
I mean, the Madisonian Compromise basically unified a couple different views that established the federal courts as to be pursued by Congress on their own terms and to set up the lower federal courts. They particular different views on what the court should represent. I think that the Hamiltonian view is that the court should take a step in and actually arbitrate between those things. But I'm not sure that there's a robust consensus on what the role of the courts. I mean, there were big disagreements about that.
That's all fair and good. I'm not going to fight on any of that. Let's just focus in. Should the judiciary be independent? I think we can all agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, are you asking my view? Why is my view relevant to what we're talking about?
Under the constitutional framework, under the moral proposition.
I don't know about that. I mean, it depends what you mean by independent. Independent to the extent that the Constitution makes it independent, but of course there are checks and balances. Congress can close all the federal courts besides the Supreme Court. Congress can make exceptions to the appellate jurisdiction. The president nominates the federal judges, and so in some sense they're independent to some extent. But I'm not going to. It depends on what you mean by independent.
Independent in their rulings, how they reach a conclusion.
What do you mean by independent? I'm asking you.
Free from political influence.
I think that's probably what the framers would have wanted. Yes.
Okay. So that's. I was just trying to lay out the foundation here. Now, obviously, we're seeing increasing calls from the left to pack the court. Is that consistent with America's moral proposition?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might depend on. You might have like factual disagreements about the state of the current judiciary or whatever, but you at least like recognize, so like certainly there would be like there's at least a hypothetical threshold that could be passed in which like packing the court or whatever would absolutely be in line with the American.
Yes, I'm asking, are we there right now?
What do you mean? Are we there?
You said he just said, well, see, I'm trying to deal in the realm of reality. You guys keep throwing out these like, well, if we take it to the most extreme hypothetical, then certainly you can prove the contradiction there. I'm just saying where we are right now, there are open calls on the left to pack the court.
Yes,
we are arguing that is not consistent with the moral proposition of America.
I think it is consistent
with the Constitution.
I'm saying that's not sufficient to like not be in line with the moral proposition.
And also agree with
that.
I mean, Adams did this shit. Fucking Madison, and they fucked with the courts. They fucked with the judges, and these people fucking wrote the documents. So I don't know. Like, I think it's total. Like your view, it seems like what you're trying to do is bootstrap American moral proposition to be like what I agree with, and to give it this like imprimatur of my policy agreements. I'm going to suss those out in terms of the American moral proposition. But it just you're being way too fucking narrow. And if that term means anything, it needs to be more general than what your specific view is of specific policy points.
No, I'm quoting to the Constitution and the Federalist Papers this entire idea and doctrine of separation of powers, which is not specifically enumerated, but everyone agrees it is the binding principle of the Constitution, binding the three branches together, that they all have independence, but they all have stuff where they can check each other. But at the end of the day, the court's rulings, Supreme Court's rulings, are meant to be independent, free from political influence.
Yeah, but the Constitution provides constitutionally for Congress to be able to expand the seats of courts.
But here's the thing.
So what sense could it be? Well, sorry. Why can something that's like constitutional, something that's allowed under the current framework of the Constitution, how could you take a view that that's against the American moral proposition, especially a provision that's not one of these new amendments? It's like the Madisonian Compromise that was in place at the very framing. So how can you say that exercising the power specifically delegated to Congress by the founding generation is counter to the American moral proposition?
Because you're making the procedural legalistic argument. Well, they can, it's legally allowable under the Constitution, but we're starting with baser principles in that. We're starting with the Declaration. We're starting with the moral proposition. It's the moral argument. Not everything legal. Just because something is legal and you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Just like me and Ryan have the same agreement here. Just because you can constitutionally burn an American flag, that doesn't mean you should do it. It's a crappy thing to do. So
do you think your natural rights philosophy means we have to have exactly 9 justices? I don't think that's insane.
No, but why are you adding more? That's the question.
No, but why would it be contradictory to the American moral principle to have more? You have to make that case.
Because if there's a political party that is saying that we don't like the way this court is ruling for our own political reasons, not based on constitutional analysis, not based on the actual analysis of the rulings themselves, just based on we don't like the political outcomes, and therefore we are going to add enough justices to get our majority back to get the rulings that we like, politically speaking, regardless of the Constitution. Why is that a good thing?
Well,
whether it's good or bad isn't relevant. Whether it's good or bad,
why is it moral?
Whether it's moral isn't.
Sure, I was going to say again, like you're supposing that the moral prospect like is as narrow as you define it, and then you're supposing that like the left is packing the court in service of going further away from the moral prospect as you define it. I don't think that's fair. I think we have again disagreements over what the moral prospect actually is, and obviously like it seems like in principle you even agree like you can pack the court in service of maintaining the moral prospect.
Pisco's broad definition of the moral proposition. What is it? Commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you think politically partisan packing of the Supreme Court is consistent with the rule of law?
Yes, it is because the Constitution puts in the hands of the amount of judges in the hands of the political branches. Agreed? Yes or no?
They do. Yes.
Well, yeah. So wait. So if it does, then you would agree that a commitment to the Constitution, that is acceptable under the Constitution. They specifically delegated to the political branches.
But see, this is where I'm going to keep pushing back because a focus on the legalistic procedure we're not focused on the legalistic procedure. We're focused on what it is the moral proposition. It is not the American legal proposition. It is the moral. It is what is the foundation for the country, for the institutions, stuff like checks and balances, separation of powers. These are all laid out. They're all there, all in the founding as these broad guiding lights for us to follow. Just because, like Ryan's example earlier, just because you can get a supermajority together and a president that can come together and abolish the 14th or at least amend it to be able to reinstitute slavery doesn't mean that's consistent with the moral
So I'll ask you a question.
Hold on. I wanted to, it sounded, Ryan, did you want to add on to that? You look like you were trying.
No, I think Gen Z got where I was going to go.
Sorry, go ahead.
An argument by analogy. So would you say that Mitch McConnell, there's an argument by analogy, Mitch McConnell, given that it was his complete power to refuse to have a hearing on Merrick Garland when that seat was up for consideration, Scalia's old seat, that it was consistent with the American moral proposition for him to use his discretion as majority leader not to put him up for even a hearing?
So with the American moral proposition, these ideas...
Can you answer that first and then you can explain?
Yes, I think, yes, it can be. If we're talking about the checks and balances and the separation of powers, if you have the authority to...
Because he has the authority to. But you agree Congress has the authority to, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so then what's the...
But here's the thing, analogy? Even though he can, I'm saying he should not have. I think they should have held a vote.
I'm not asking your overall ought. I'm asking whether or not it's consistent with the American moral proposition. You said yes for McConnell, no for Congress, both hands of branches of government. How could you possibly justify that?
I'm saying they under the moral proposition, well, under the legal framework, they could do it. Under the moral proposition, no, I don't think they should have done it.
No, I'm not asking whether you should have.
No, not under my personal. I'm not
asking. So I just want to be clear about something. So I'm going to say it 3 times. I'm not asking your personal. I'm not asking your personal. I'm not asking your personal. I'm asking under the American moral proposition. You just said that it was consistent, that it could be consistent for McConnell to withhold the hearings for the Merrick Garland nomination, that would be consistent with the American moral proposition.
And I changed my answer.
You changed your answer. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're saying it's not consistent with the American moral proposition for McConnell to withhold that seat?
Yeah, I think he should have held the hearing. And
I'm not asking whether you should have. You're saying it is consistent?
Should is he's using moral language. Should meaning it's We don't need to nitpick every single word.
Objective morality that he was speaking to earlier. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I think that my view is, in the exercise of that at this level of generality, that if we're trying to across time and across space talk about some consistent principle that is true across time, it's not going to be something incredibly narrow. It needs to be
are you familiar with like the difference between ontology and epistemology?
Loosely, I think epistemology relates to what we know and how we know it, and ontology is what is.
I bring it up because when people say that like natural law is objectively true, that's an ontological claim. You're making like a metaphysical claim about the universe, about reality. You're saying that natural law exists, it's real. Epistemology are the question of like, how do we know what natural law is? How do we increase our understanding it over time is a different thing. It's not inconsistent for people to be wrong about an objective principle. In fact, if you have an objective principle, it follows that people will be wrong often. The problem that I'm having, and I don't think you've ever really been able to explain, though you've artfully moved into other areas, is that the left today wants to go the wrong direction. The left today is purposefully attempting to say that membership in groups should grant you rights. You should have more legal rights because of your membership in specific identity groups. For example, just to like name a few because we're getting to the end here, the Biden administration attempted to put DEI quotas on every company that was listed on NASDAQ on their board membership. The SEC passed a rule in the Biden era to do that. In the Biden era, money was given by the government expressly on the basis of membership in various identity groups. The Biden administration championed, and I know you and I debated this already, but we told him to go deep in the weeds, but what I consider at least to be de facto race quotas in the affirmative action context. And that's saying nothing of the local policies, like in California and Oregon, where money was given expressly on the basis of race, where COVID medication was given expressly on the basis of race. Policy after policy after policy in the modern era, when people definitely know better, is being done expressly on this basis. And I don't see how that could possibly square, certainly with my understanding of the American moral proposition, but even with the kind of basic moral intuition that we ought to treat people as individuals.
Yeah, so I'll respond to that is the way you're trying to distinguish. Yeah, of course, people can be wrong, but what really distinguishes people being wrong and the modern era is at least the people who are being wrong were moving in the right direction. And the people now are moving in the wrong direction. The directionality is not going to help you because a lot of people who you're going to say, no, it's not, because you're going to grant. I'm going to give you a hypothetical where one of the framers who you start by saying is upholding the American moral proposition is going in the wrong direction of an issue. And so the directionality, it's just another way of reintroducing the same issue, which is there are people who are going in the wrong direction or who do the wrong thing in the moment. And notwithstanding that, you still grant are part of the American moral proposition, even though they're quote unquote wrong. And so whether it's the wrong direction or the wrong position, I don't really see the difference.
No, because Pisco, if you in the movement to abolish slavery, which is where we started, this took some time. It was a human universal in basically all cultures all across the world that slavery existed. And for the first time in the modern era with America and England, it was abolished on the basis of precisely the principles and moral duties and obligations that I'm championing here today. So yeah, I'm very proud of that directionality. What bothers me, Pisco, is that when in the modern era, having learned that lesson over the bloody arc of history, the left decides, you know what, we should as long as we're the good guys, we should be able to discriminate on the basis of race. It's fine for us to do it as long as we think it's right today. Like what they're doing is they're running in the wrong direction. And just like, I don't hold Newton accountable, or I hold him, let's say, less accountable for making mistakes in physics that he couldn't possibly have corrected. It would be very weird today for a physicist to make arguments based only off Newtonian physics, ignoring relativity.
Jefferson knew better. But Jefferson knew better.
So can I give you a quote about that?
Yeah.
So here's a fun one. This is Abraham Lincoln debating Douglas on the topic of whether or not slavery should be allowed. And he said, "I believe the entire record of the world, from the date of the Declaration of Independence up to 3 years ago, may be searched in vain for one single affirmation from one single man that the black race was not included in the Declaration of Independence. I think I may defy Judge Douglas to show that he ever said so, that Washington ever said so, that any president ever said so, that any member of Congress ever said so, or that any living man upon the whole earth ever said so, until the necessities of the present policy of the Democratic Party in regard to slavery had to invent that affirmation."
Right, that's not true, right?
When Lincoln was...
That's not true.
I'm saying it's good enough for me. It's good enough for Lincoln. It's good enough to abolish slavery. It's just not good enough for you, and it's not good enough for the modern left.
Do you believe that Lincoln's statement there is true?
I don't know. I haven't done the research exhaustively to find every single record. That's what he's claiming.
Okay. I mean, I think that I'm happy to lay out the disagreement here. I think the disagreement is frankly a semantic one, to be honest with you. I think that it has to do with like grounding out what this term that I don't think it's like a popular usage of the term American moral proposition means, and taking on different values for that term will lead you perhaps to different places. But I think even just on the view of the people espousing that the left are abandoning it, you're getting to weird areas where you have to come up with like again very odd and arbitrary ways to distinguish why this kind of diverging from the American moral proposition in one context, which seems so much worse. And we could do a bunch of different examples, including the right to vote for women, et cetera, et cetera. There's way more that we could go on in terms of examples there, that deviating from that wouldn't cause you to be against the American moral proposition for such individuals. But the modern day DEI, this is the first aberration. This is the time in which we're really going to. I just don't think that that intuition is clear to people. Maybe if it is, maybe if you think that it seems a little circular, that you're assuming kind of the objective morality and the natural rights stuff as part of what's going on here, even though a lot of that stuff is opaque.
Yeah. The problem is you keep making these comparisons, and the issue is all these examples you're giving of the historical record are the bringing people in to the American equation, the moral proposition that we are advocating for here. Every example you've listed, slavery, Jim Crow, women's right to vote, everything you've listed is about bringing people into the equation. The modern iteration of equity and DEI is we've now entered the realm of where things are now a zero-sum game. If you're talking about college admissions, only one person gets the seat. If you're talking about board member seats, only one person gets that seat. If we're talking about, Ryan doesn't bring this one up, but it's one I bring up, in Hollywood, that they've instituted these diversity requirements for on-screen and behind the screen in order to even qualify for the award season. So these are zero-sum games.
I'm not I just want to make sure you understand. I'm not comparing being pro-DEI with being pro-abolition of slavery. What I'm saying is someone who has the wrong position on DEI is not compatible with the American moral proposition, but someone who has the wrong opinion on slavery is compatible. That's the kind of distinction.
What about abolishing property rights? We talk about DEI law. What about the left's flirtation with socialism and communism?
It depends in what sense. I think to totally eliminate...
Just 2 more minutes and then we'll shut down.
I think to totally eliminate all property rights, as many communists want to do, I think that is in some sense inconsistent with the American moral proposition. So I do agree with that.
What if they did it legally?
Yeah, no, because I think that the rule of law and the Constitution... well, I guess you're saying... I think there's a trouble in that the principle... You could do a certain amount of disfigurement to the structure of the Constitution. So let's say you constitutionally pass an amendment
You can do anything to it.
That gets rid of all the branches of government. And just makes it a unitary system where there's a king for life. I would say that there is, and I don't have to define it in like particular granularity, that there's a sufficient amount of disfigurement that you could do to the Constitution that would, okay, now there's some separate principle here, which is you've done sufficient disfigurement to the Constitution that it's really not in keeping with the same vision.
But where would you draw that principle from?
No, I don't have to. Yeah, it's like a Sortes paradox that I don't know exactly. I can't define it exactly.
No. It's not, because in our country, we have a separate document, the Declaration of Independence, which was expressly our founders sat down and they said, what is America's moral claim to existence? Because we're not, like, if you look at Ireland's Declaration of Independence, it just says, we, the Irish, are a different people and the English have been dominating us, therefore we should be free. Their claim to existence was ethnic, but America didn't do that. America laid out a philosophic principle. They said, we find these truths to be self-evident. You might think they're wrong today, but they're saying they're axiomatic.
But did the property rights include human beings?
They're axiomatic,
in the Declaration of Independence.
and that the violation of these rights is why we are justified in our revolution, in our existence as a country. So it's not
the property rights
making it up. It's not like my proprietary definition. It's in our founding documents.
No. I agree that our constitutional dedication involves rights at some level of granularity, right? Like liberty, like property, like the pursuit of happiness. These are all things that I agree are part of the constitutional tradition, that are part of the American moral proposition. But what those things mean, there's a lot of play on the joints to be consistent with the basic American moral proposition as I understand it, because it must include disagreements on, does liberty include the right to own people? Does your property right extend as far as people? Does liberty include the right to vote? Does the direct right to vote, or the right for women, or the right for people under the age of 18? So I agree that the Declaration of Independence contains values in it that are absolutely part of that are, irrevocable with respect to the American constitutional tradition. But at what level of granularity is the question? And what the framers understood that they were doing, that property for them at the time of the enactment of the Constitution and before that with the Declaration of Independence included the right to own human beings. It just did.
Last thought from Ryan or Gen Z, and then we'll move into closing statements if you had one in response to that.
You can go ahead if you want.
I think probably going to closing statements is fine, because that essentially was a closing statement.
Okay. I'll Kip Pisco, if you wanted to go ahead and go into your closing statement officially.
I'll just say that
double dipping, brother.
I'm probably sympathetic to a lot of the views on like woke stuff. I often will bring up bona fides because I voted for Bernie Sanders or I did this, but one of the things I bring up is that, I was like against a lot of the identity politics in the 2015, 16, 17 era, and I lost friends because of my position on some of those things. And so I'm sympathetic to some of the attitudes with respect to identity politics that have been expressed. But the problem I have is like the terminology here. I think it can't include things, the American moral proposition, that are so nebulous to be beyond the scope of most Americans. Things like meta ethics, right? Things like whether or not Marxism, things that didn't even exist and were in the conception of the founding generation. It has to be more general, more basic than that. And it can't include just mere normative attitudes on policies, really, because there's such vast disagreement on areas of huge consequences that we've brought out. We've mostly talked about slavery, but again, there's so much there where the thread line must be strong enough to bear massive disagreements. And that's why I think trying to narrow the view of the American moral proposition to be like anti-DEI, anti-woke, anti-even race-based policies, I'm sorry to say, is unavailing for that reason. It just really does seem like a shell game where you're trying to sneak in your moral attitudes and maybe the audience's normative dispositions, and to make that a constitutional issue or an issue of intergenerational solidarity, and that somehow this aberration stands in stark contrast to potentially other quote unquote objective errors in people's morality over the course of years. And so that's why I was bringing this all up, is that on their view, it would seem absurd to make a moral difference in terms of whether or not someone is following the American moral proposition because they were wrong on DEI, but not wrong on slavery, not wrong on if they're wrong on like women being allowed to vote, the doctrine of coverture, the First Amendment, where our conception of the First Amendment is much broader today than it was at the time of the framing. And so all of these different issues, I think, lend me to believe that the left is not violating the American moral proposition at its most basic level, because they're standing up. They're standing up for commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law. They're fighting against the Republicans that are trying to tear down the rule of law and commitment to the Constitution. People who are trying to subvert the Constitution. And so given that, I don't think that mere disagreement on DEI, even if you grant that their position is wrong, is enough to get you out of that, like, play on the joints, that playground which you're allowed to be in legitimately as part of our American tradition.
Thank you, Pisco. And Nonfon, to you, please.
Yeah, okay, there's only one honorary founding father post-Hamilton. Okay, that matters. It's Aaron Burr, who went to live with Jeremy Bentham. Okay, he became a base utilitarian. All right, that's the real American proposition. But in all seriousness, I mean, I'm happy to second the stuff Pisco said. I mean, they did almost exactly what I thought what they were gonna do, which is define the moral proposition in such a way that it relies on controversial medical ethical claims that, like, most Americans could not even lay out, let alone actually agree to. And I do think most of the discussion on this was sort of a meta conversation about what we're allowed to bring up rather than the actual, like, factuality of it. But I do think it is also relevant to say, like, there are left-leaning people, left-leaning organizations, the Democratic Party, which are currently, like, fighting for rights that I think even Ryan and GenZAttorney would say are in line with the American moral proposition. I mean, I think I brought up the ACLU, which I don't know if that's holistic. Like, I don't know if I personally would consider it a holistically, like, left-leaning organization, but Ryan certainly does. Like, they are currently and have, in the past, in this year, filed lawsuits on behalf of immigrants who are being deported, under the Alien Enemies Act in order to, try to grant them due process, which they are not being provided. I think that is a view that something that is in line with even the natural rights theory that they espouse, and that's something that the left is doing, I would say, even broadly politically, but certainly the ACLU is doing that.
Thank you, Nonfon. And GenZ, to you, please.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again for having me. I'll plug the pod again. We got Ordered Liberty podcast every Sunday night, 8 o'clock, me and Ryan, and a rotating panel of guests every week talking about, trying to reassert the American moral proposition and apply that framework to the modern news and just break it all down from there. As far as the debate tonight, I hope the audience was able to get something useful out of it. It was certainly tough at times, it felt, to communicate, just because felt like trying to ask some basic questions, but they were almost always met with, well, it depends, or, well, what do you mean by that, or what's your definition of that? And it's like, certainly there has to be some clarity of terms, but it felt like we were getting pretty, as the word of the night was granular. And when I think we all kind of can understand where the other is coming from. But that aside, I think the main problem I have here with my friends on the left, and I do mean that sincerely as friends, I think we are all in this together on the American project, is that the entire argument from their side was confined to simple legalistic procedure and saying that, well, if it can be done, if the Constitution allows it to be done, then, well, who are we to say that it shouldn't be done? If that's our only binding principle is what the Constitution says and the rule of law, well, that just opens the door to so many crazy things that can be done. So long as it's done constitutionally, my friends on the left seem to not be in a position to criticize it because it was done within the legal procedure. And if there's no such thing as objective morality, or we don't understand what the American moral proposition is, then how are we supposed to criticize it? But yeah, that logic leads to just a whole cavalcade of horrible things that could be done. We're saying just because something can be done constitutionally doesn't mean it should be done morally or be inconsistent with the American moral proposition. So an amendment reinstituting slavery would be inconsistent with the Declaration's promise of not having slavery or protecting the liberty of everyone in this country. So I think to the audience, I would just ask, which system do you find more consistent, more compatible with this country? The side that says essentially anything is possible so long done legally and constitutionally, or the side that says just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done? I think we've got the more consistent position, I think, and honestly, their positions kind of conceded the debate of whether or not the left has abandoned the proposition with these types of arguments. So with that, I'll just say thank you again to everybody, and yeah.
Thank you, GenZ, and Ryan, to you.
Thanks again, Sarah, for hosting, and thanks, GenZ, for backing me up, and for my frenemies, Nonfon and Pisco. Always fun. Look, America's a propositional nation. This is who we are, and it's very important that we learn about this and we talk about this. Because my friends across the aisle here are right. Most people don't know anything about American founding philosophy. Most people don't know anything about the American moral proposition. And that's our failure. As Reagan, to paraphrase Reagan, the loss of liberty is only a generation away. We are a propositional nation. And I said this earlier, but when the enemies are at the doorstep and they're trying to undo America, their first move universally is to attack the American moral proposition. They're going to attack the fact that we have a moral heritage, that there is something objective and philosophical that binds us together, because they have to. They always have to, because communism is incompatible with the American moral proposition. Slavery is incompatible with the moral proposition. A theocracy is incompatible with the moral proposition. So in order to institute any of those things, you would have to convince the people that this didn't exist first. And unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. Our children are not taught about this in schools. Our children are not taught that our founders believed in Scottish common sense moral realism, that they believed that these truths were axiomatic, that there was a grounding epistemology, a grounding philosophy on which they made the claims in the Declaration of Independence. They're not taught enough that what made slavery go away, what led to its abolishment, it was this moral proposition. It was good enough for Lincoln. It was good enough for Douglas. It was good enough for MLK. It was good enough for the women's suffrage movement. They all expressly cited the American moral proposition as stated in the Declaration of Independence as the justification for those movements. And yet today, even amongst my learned friends, it seems like it's a confusing, or what did Nonfon call it, controversial claim. That's sad. That's something that we ought to fix. We ought to have an education system that solves these problems. But instead, we have the 1619 Project. Instead, we have a consistent attempt to undermine this. And I do put that on the footsteps of the left, because as a former teacher, I can tell you there are no conservatives in teachers' colleges. There are no conservatives, or barely any, in the education system. This is a left-created problem. Unfortunately, as a result, people don't have a grounding in this philosophy, and predictably, collectivism is on the rise. Authoritarianism is on the rise. You even see some people arguing for a ethno-state or a theocracy on the rise. Pisco, I love you, buddy. You host your show with a communist, an open communist. There is a clear abandonment of these principles that would lead to understanding what is outside the bounds for us as Americans. And unfortunately, that's going away. I think it was clearly demonstrated in our conversation tonight. And unfortunately, I think it leaves us hollow, empty, with what I think it leaves us with exactly what Pisco described: a legalistic rather than a moral foundation that is insufficient to armor us against assaults from more convincing and more powerful ideologies. And I think we can do better. But in any case, I really enjoyed this. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much. I'm Ryan C. Mullalley. You can follow me on X or on YouTube at those places. And thank you again, Sarah.
Absolutely. I thought this was a wonderful debate. Even my dad's in the chat saying how informative it was. So congratulations to all of you. If you can impress my dad, I'll take that as a win.
We're picking up the level. We're going.
Now, mom's in the chat too. She probably thought it was boring, but that's just mom. Okay, so
Mr. and Mrs. Tomato.
Yes. I had a question, and maybe I'm completely off base in my thought process, but if the left sits more utilitarian and in these other like morality departments of things, then would they have even been on the same basis to take ownership of the moral proposition? If Ryan and Gen Z, you say it's objective morality, but I don't think the left even agrees with objective morality. So
I'm not sure that there's I want to respond to that. I think it's an interesting question, because there's multiple layers to it. The first is it true that leftists seem more utilitarian? I don't buy that. I think that a lot of the time the leftist language is done in terms of rights, and you have a right to the sweat of your brow, or they say, like, for example, in defense of abortion, something that sometimes I think they go way too far in it, is like bodily autonomy. They speak in terms of rights as opposed to in terms of like what's best for the most amount of people. I understand that some leftists do speak about that, but I'm not actually convinced that on the normative side that the leftists are really like ideologically dedicated to utilitarianism in that sense. I think that a lot of their rhetoric and ideology comes from like a rights-based perspective. And then secondly, on the meta-ethical side, I just don't see a good reason to believe that leftists are not committed to some version of objective morality. Like, I want to be clear, like, I don't think it's a coherent thing to say that there's such a thing as objective morality. We can get into that if you want, but to the extent that it's something that's believed, there's no contradiction between utilitarianism and objective morality or any of these other normative ethical frames. And so I just don't see a case for why we think the left is committed to a particular meta or normative ethical view.
Well, and that kind of answers my question in of itself. If the left is not in the objective morality stance to begin with, then how could they have ever been a part of the moral proposition from the beginning? Right.
Well, I'm saying I don't know if that's founded, that the left isn't committed to objective morality.
Well, I mean, to answer your question about whether or not there was part of the beginning, I think the subjective morality, cultural relativism, or moral relativism that me and Ryan are pointing to, we're looking at stuff that really took off kind of in the 60s and just exploded from there with just this postmodernist, deconstructionist, everything is relative. That's kind of what we're looking at. And so those people, and a lot of them, in the universities and whatnot, yeah, they will openly denounce the American moral proposition. They'll denounce America just entirely. Just the whole thing is built on, well, as Ryan mentioned earlier, a more recent development, but the 1619 Project, that the whole country is just built on slavery, and that's all it was really ever known for and good for, and therefore there's really no redeeming value to America. That's the kind of stuff that we're pointing at. That is inconsistent with the moral proposition, those types of ideas.
Yeah, it's not that there are no people who believe in objective morality on the left. It's just a very, I don't have a stat, but like in terms of my anecdotes and in terms of the philosophy espoused on the left, it's a minority. And I say that because you have a lot of people who I think hold views similar to like Destiny or Alex O'Connor, who will say something like they're an emotivism or they're an ethical non-realist. So they don't believe that there's actually an objective moral truth. I think it's constructed by us. I think that's a huge percentage of people. And then you do, when you do run into objective moral thought from left-leaning people, it's typically more like people like Sam Harris or Nonfon who are making kind of a utilitarian consequentialist argument, which, while I will grant you is an objective theory, it might not work, but it's framed as an objective theory. It's still distinct from natural law theory. And is quite distinct from it.
Most people don't know what the fuck these meta-ethical discussions even entail. Like, I understand that there are some prominent left-wingers that are like subjectivists, I guess, and I would grant that. But it just doesn't seem to be relevant to what most people's experiences of morality are. I'm sure if you were to ask most Democrats, you think there's things that are objectively moral or immoral? I think most would probably say yes, but they don't truly understand these concepts. And so for you to say that there's a crisis, that people don't understand my meta-ethical frame or objective morality in that sense, I just think they never have. They never have. This has never been the case.
It's not my meta-ethical frame that I'm worried about.
A particular one.
It's the fact that we as a country agreed that a particular meta-ethical frame was self-evidently true. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. It says that we have a particular self-evidently true, axiomatically true view of philosophy.
Self-evident does not mean objective.
My concern is that over time, the left has moved away from that. And I find it very concerning because when you have that basis, that grounding, it allows you to call balls and strikes so much more easily. Like
self-evident does not mean objective. Objective means mind independent. Okay, so being self-evident, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Doesn't mean we believe like
Pisco, there's this school of thought is called Scottish common sense moral realism. It was brought to America by a founding father, a signer of the Declaration of Independence called Witherspoon. Witherspoon taught at what's now Princeton, and he taught Madison. He deeply influenced Jefferson. And just because you're bringing this up, I'm just going to info dump. It's too much for the debate, but I'll info dump. At the time of the founding, there was a huge debate within epistemology because there were people like David Hume who were arguing that reason is always slave to a passion. We can never actually know anything. It's always based off these fundamental assumptions, and we can never get to truth. And that was kind of the basis for what became, as Gen Z said later, postmodernism, because there was this epistemic doubt that couldn't be resolved, that David Hume objected into basically all of his epistemology. And that was a very popular view. Scottish common sense moral realism arose in response to that and said, no, we don't need to doubt our senses. We don't need to doubt the moral truth written in our hearts. We don't need to doubt our free will. There are some things that are just self-evident. They are axiomatically true, and we do not need to justify them. They simply are. And that epistemology, that school of philosophy, which was deeply influential amongst the founders, is why Jefferson used the phrase self-evident. It's not a rhetoric flourish. It's a reference to a specific school of philosophy with a specific heritage and a specific belief about what moral truth is and how we come to know it. Now, you may not agree with it and probably don't, but my point when I say that I
don't understand it. I mean, I don't understand.
It's actually a defined term. It's not up to us. It's already been written.
Well, can you tell me what you mean by objective morality?
It does there's a tree out in the middle of nowhere. Does that tree still exist? Is it still there whether I see it, know it? Even if I disappeared off this planet, would that tree still be there?
That's a question. I'm not understanding how that
it's
informs
it's objectively true that the tree will still be there.
I can grant that the existence of the tree is in some sense mind independent, but that's again that's an is, that's not an ought. I understand ethics to be something about like a moral duty or a moral ought.
The objective claim is that there is such thing metaphysically as natural law, which is a set of moral propositions that we are obligated to follow as humans. There is a moral law, it's written on our heart, and it is our obligation to do our best to live up to it. Right?
Why?
Think about it as like platonic form. No. That's fair, right? And a really interesting would be debate is why, but keep in mind, the moral proposition is that it's self-evident, right?
But the thing is, like, can you communicate? Okay, it's a set of moral propositions, and but like, what makes them objective?
Well, are you asking me?
Yeah. What makes them objective?
If you're asking me personally, I think they're objective because they reflect our connection to God.
They reflect our connection to God.
We have the moral law written on our heart. We know what's right and wrong. We are connected to ultimate truth in that way. But I've heard other people describe them in different ways.
But God is a mind, right? So God is ultimately that's subjective. That's mind dependent on the nature of God and God's mind, isn't it?
When we say mind independent, we mean independent of human minds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, independent of human minds. That's all you mean by objective morality?
Pisco, this is like 101 moral philosophy. Like, this is what everybody means.
Dude, can you not be such a fucking arrogant piece of shit all the time? It is
crazy
how much you talk shit all the time.
We'll get into open panel. I'm gonna squish that one right there, just like that. We can get into objective morality in open panel, and you guys can do the dookie thing a little more there.
I want to ask Ryan, not on objective morality, but on something you mentioned earlier, as well as something I've seen him mention like in other videos. I just don't buy that. For example, we're taught about the Declaration of Independence. We're taught about natural rights. Not that they don't necessarily always use those terms or whatever, but people, we go over that stuff in middle school, right? Like, and it's not as if we're, exposing children to Jeremy Bethan and John Stuart Mills and going over utilitarianism with them. Like, I'm in college right now. Like last semester, I had an ethics class. I was obviously they go over utilitarian philosophies there, but like, even amongst left-leaning people in my class, like I was the only one defending some strong version of utilitarianism. There were left-leaning people who critiqued on my discussion forum of why I support utilitarianism, like their belief in rights, and like they were concerned that there'd be rights violations under my philosophy, even though that they were clearly left-leaning, like they believed in positive rights, like.
So why wasn't Jefferson's the morals that are propositions that are written on his heart? Why didn't that include a stronger condemnation of slavery?
Oh, I mean, to the extent that he didn't have one, and I think that, you know, you've made some points, and we've made some counterpoints. So the record there is mixed. To the extent he didn't, it's because he was wrong.
But that's God's fault, right?
No, that's
why
his
is it
fault.
not God's? Wait, why didn't God write it more clearly on his heart?
I think this is inviting a whole lot more
debate,
on free will.
Let me, and I know there are plenty of people out there who could jump on open panel and actually have that full blown out conversation for 10 hours. And just as a record to anybody watching on anybody's end, I've dropped the open panel link into my chat. It is pinned. Gentlemen, if you want to drop that StreamYard link to anyone in your chat, you're more than welcome to as well. We welcome all. Tom Carpenter says, it's amazing how feeling like crud can make you no longer care what unintelligent people who think they are intelligent say. Shots fired from Tom. He follows up to say, felt the same way when I listened in on a bit of the Dusty cast today with He Who Shall Not Be Named. Ruh-roh. Thank you, Tom. Trib says, I think this should dissolve or evolve into a meta-ethics debate unless we are just accepting that one side's morality is the just morality because it's clearly split on political lines currently. And I think I was kind of tapping into that originally. But if anybody wants to respond, you're more than
can I respond to that? Yeah, I think that's right. It would devolve into a meta-ethics debate, but for the fact that our founders told us which meta-ethical view is correct. My point isn't, I don't need to argue that they were right to have that meta-ethical view. I'm merely saying that is the American moral proposition, is their view, and they wrote it down. So when people say, even now when Pisco's saying, questioning, oh, does that make sense? Is that right? That's a departure from the meta-ethical view. And like that's, you know, I'm not saying that people can't depart for it, but they shouldn't, because it's true and American and just, but that is the departure, right? When you say that it's not good enough, I want to unwind this, that actually is the departure.
I think there's a problem here of proprietary and private language. If what you're saying is that the American moral proposition entails your meta-ethical worldview, then you're just using words in a way that's particular to you, but I don't think it would map on to most people's or the academy's like understanding it, to the extent that there is an understanding of this term. You're just like defining a term. You're defining a term that necessitates your meta-ethical worldview, and like I guess there are a bunch of entailments from that you think it's, but it just really seems tautological and trivial if you're just accepting your definition that entails.
I'm not defining the term. It was defined in the Declaration of Independence. I gave you the
term isn't found there, right?
Yeah. I gave you the pedigree of what that term meant. I explained to you what the founders believed and the philosophy that informed their decision, what the term felt self-evident meant, and why they wrote what they wrote, and they didn't write something else.
Is the term in the Declaration of Independence?
No, it's not. The term is not in there.
So then the term is not. You would agree the term is not defined in the Declaration?
No, I would disagree with that because
why?
Context exists, Pisco.
What context leads you to believe that the term
but more importantly, the very fact that you want to argue that this is not the American moral proposition is actually the point we're trying to make. Like if you went back and you looked at Lincoln when he freed the slaves, what was the American moral proposition? It was crystal clear. It was the Declaration of Independence. When Martin Luther King was talking about America's broken promises, the promise wasn't the Constitution. The promise was made in the Declaration of Independence. That's what he cited.
No, but not for the meta-ethical position.
Of course it was.
Okay. You'd have to be willing to accept the objective morality in order to accept everything else that Ryan is saying, and because you're not wanting to do that, like everything else kind of goes out the window.
Which is fine. He doesn't have to accept
it.
But
yeah, you don't have to accept it.
Our founders did, and the proposition relies on it. And when you reject it, I think that's pretty good evidence of what exactly we're talking about when we say there's been an abandonment of the moral proposition.
You're basically arguing that this term American moral proposition has some historical pedigree, but you haven't cited any dictionary usage of that term, any usage by the framers that would say that it entails the normative view. So you're jumping from, well, the American founders, a lot of them were moral objectivists and natural rights holders, and therefore this term American moral proposition entails that view. And I just don't know how you're getting that jump.
We wrote a document to the King of England explaining our moral justification for existence as a nation.
Not responsive to what I just said.
And you're finding it, as only a lawyer could, difficult contextually to figure out how the American moral proposition could have been
You're
related
just not
to
responding
us
to what I said.
articulating a moral philosophy in our founding documents.
It's begging the question. So the whole question is, where do you get your view that this term, right, the semantic, your meaning of the term American moral proposition, that when people use that term, they mean objective morality? I'm asking where the term meaning you're getting that from. Where are you understanding that from?
Because
other than your own private language.
Well, even just a quick Google, like what pops up first, it even says the interpretation and evolution, moral foundation for politics, the political and legal vision of the United States is seen as the direct outgrowth of this prior moral vision. That means it's got to be the starting point, right? So if it's a starting point, it has to be objective because
I'm
nothing
asking
else.
what it is, like the term American moral proposition. Where is the framer saying this term means objective morality? Where is what I'm basically arguing is that Ryan is arguing that this term means a particular thing. What's
the works of Witherspoon?
The works of Witherspoon say American moral
read,
proposition.
Read Witherspoon, who's expressed the
read
concept.
Witherspoon.
Yeah, but beyond that, Pisco, just because he was the academic who brought Scottish common sense moral realism into the American framework most prominently, but beyond that, Pisco, the use of the term, and the reason I use the term a lot, is because I believe America is a propositional nation.
What does that mean, a propositional nation?
Founded on a moral proposition.
Not race, not ethnicity.
So America is founded on a moral proposition.
Yes.
And that moral proposition is?
As expressed in the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
That you take that to be a moral proposition?
It's self-evidently a moral proposition.
So
I mean, literally, Pisco, he's writing the moral justification for our revolution against England. Of course, it's a moral proposition.
No, but there are statements in there. There are multiple propositions in that Declaration of Independence. Correct?
Yeah, there are a whole bunch.
It's not a singular proposition. It's a set of propositions, right?
Sure. I don't see how that matters.
There's more than one, Ryan.
Yeah, there's more than one natural right.
So
they also
but is the American moral
express a preference for democracy. There's other things in there. Yeah.
Right. So are all the propositions contained in the Declaration of Independence the American moral proposition? Are all the propositions? Each one.
I would focus on paragraph 2, which is the thesis statement. But yes.
So, for example, the proposition, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation until assent shall be obtained, and when suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. That is the American moral proposition.
That is an application of the American moral proposition. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
At the beginning of the document, he explains what the moral proposition is, and at the bottom of the document, he explains how England violated it, thus justifying rebellion. Based on the principle you gave earlier, by the way, which is that it can't be just casual disregard for natural law. There has to be some kind of sustained long-term harm to natural law because stability is a good thing. And he expresses that in the second paragraph as well.
And let's just ask the inverse. Pisco, do you not think the Declaration is the American moral proposition?
I think it's a set of propositions.
Okay, propositions. Do you think so? You think it is?
I think it's a set of propositions, but I mean, yeah, the founding of the country is related in some sense to people's understanding and belief in a set of propositions, but I don't take every proposition expounded in the Declaration of Independence to be, quote, the American proposition. I think that's far too wide at that point. It's too specific, right? Like it must mean something more general.
The one we focused on the whole time, because I understand you're trying to like broaden it out and try and obfuscate with that. We focused this entire time on paragraph 2. We both read it verbatim in our openings. That's what we understand is the American moral proposition. That's what the entire debate, anyone who discusses the moral proposition, points to that as the font head that everything else flows from. We focus on that the whole time. That specific paragraph, do you think that is not a moral proposition for the country?
Well, first of all, it is literally not if you mean literally, right? So I'm just answering your question. Literally, it is not a moral proposition. Literally, so I'm just saying literally. I think it suggests that that they believe that there's a moral proposition, but it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's a proposition about their doxastic state, their state of mind. So literally, it's not a moral proposition, right? Agree with that. Literally.
Do you think they were writing just on behalf of themselves?
Can you just answer that question first? Literally, you would agree it's not a moral proposition, correct?
I'm trying to figure out
why can't you grant that? I grant shit that are fucking bullet bites all the time.
Hold on.
Because I don't want to play into the
So
philosophical pedantics of
You're the one
this
bringing
entire
us here.
time.
No,
I'm asking you, what do you think it is then? If you say it's not literally a moral
I
proposition,
just told you what I thought it was.
It is literally a moral proposition, Pisco.
Okay,
it is
so when I
literally
say
a moral proposition.
when I say I think I'm hungry, is that a moral proposition?
No.
What is it? I think that this is true. Is that a moral proposition?
No.
Okay, so
depending what you're referencing is true. I'm assuming it's something not.
Yeah,
moral.
this is a state a state of belief. Correct?
Yeah, this is the epistemology ontology distinction, Pisco.
Is it a statement of their belief?
The founders as people had beliefs, and they wrote as a nation on behalf of a new nation.
This is crazy. Just
we
granted.
think these things are self-evidently true. Not true to me, not my subjective opinion, but self-evidently true that all men are created equal, that they were endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights.
You can't even grant. So I'm about to grant
it
you
is
that
obviously a moral proposition. Just
God.
like Pisco, if someone says, if you're talking to someone and they say communism is good, that's also a moral proposition. It's
no. Hang on a second. No. That is a moral proposition. Saying communism is a moral proposition.
Yeah,
I think. Wait. Sorry. I'm just being super specific here. I'm totally willing to grant that they believed in moral propositions. I was trying to give you like a baseline. Do you agree? You would agree that on its face, literally, it's not. So, for example,
no, I don't agree. It's literally a moral proposition, Pisco.
So when someone says, for example, Paul thinks that slavery is bad, is that a moral proposition?
Paul thinks slavery is bad? That's a description of Paul.
Yeah. So when you say Paul holds that slavery is immoral, same thing, right?
That's the belief of Paul.
Right. We hold that slavery is immoral. Is that a belief of we?
Pisco.
What did you grant it? Holy fuck! This slippery shit.
No,
oh my God! Just answer it.
I'm just trying to get you up the chain. They're saying when
I'm asking for your position here. We can move on.
True. Okay, Pisco. What they are saying is not we hold on our personal beliefs. They're saying we hold because it is a true aspect of ourselves and our creator. That's what they're saying. Even in the first paragraph above, when they reference nature's law and nature's God, they are referring to an objective state of affairs. Their belief in their God, in God.
Ryan, I'm going to grant. I'm going to grant that these individuals had moral propositions in them.
And who were they speaking for?
But you won't. Wait. But you won't even grant. Sorry.
You're looking for subjectivity in that aspect, but that's where the disconnect is, because if it's objective, there is no, when he says we, he doesn't mean me, you, Nonfon, Scott and Ryan all got together and said we believe this. What they did was they applied it as it was given to them. This is objective. This is true, and this is what we're going to go forward with. It's like when you try to think about the concept, it's like, well, how could we just say it's objective? But that's what we're understanding in between objective and subjective, and that's what we're applying here.
And just Sarah, to build on that, they weren't writing on behalf of themselves; they were writing on behalf of the country.
Right.
When they write the declaration, they're saying, "We, the nation, believe this to be objectively true."
It's a sign of It's a sign of how bad faith this entire thing is. I'm willing to grant that these people had beliefs regarding natural rights and objective morality, but this is just a starting point to be like, well, you agree that literally it's not it's not a moral proposition. This literally
a moral proposition.
It literally is not, right? Saying, because you just granted, right, and we'll go down it. Paul holds that slavery is wrong is not a moral proposition, correct?
Paul holds that slavery is wrong?
Yeah, that's not a moral proposition, right?
Is
it a moral proposition or not?
Is Paul saying subjectively
No.
I hold it?
No. Sorry. That's all the question I'm giving. So someone says to you, Paul holds that slavery is wrong. Is that statement a moral proposition, yes or no?
That sounds like a description.
Coming from? Yeah, where is it coming from? If he said, if I said based on biblically, morality based on the Bible, then yes, it does hold because it's coming from something else, from the original source.
It's obviously a statement about Paul's belief, not about what is a moral ought or not.
If Paul's belief is foundational to his Christianity, where that morality comes from, then it's foundational in that, and it goes further up the line. So it goes back to the framework. And that's kind of
the framework might be objective, but the statement Paul holds a belief.
if I say 2 + 2 is 4, you could say I'm expressing my subjective opinion about the fact that 2 + 2 is 4, but that's not really what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that there's an objective truth about the world that indicates that 2 + 2 is 4. That's what the founders are getting at. They say something is self-evidently true.
I'm just asking you to grant something. So if the statement read, the king holds that these truths are self-evident, would that be a statement of a moral proposition?
Depending on where it comes from.
It has to depend on the truths.
What do you?
It depends on where
what they're talking about.
Okay,
So
I mean,
that's why
we just are not
said-
speaking the same language.
No, because
I
really
hear
is
what
crazy.
you're saying.
You
Hold
keep
on.
talking
Let me tie
epistemology
the
and
bow
I'm
up.
aiming at ontology, and that's the distinction.
Yeah, it depends on who the person's belief system, where it's coming from. Is it coming from an objective truth based on Christianity, or is it coming from a subject truth based on something else? And that's why it's important to understand that that's where the grounding was and the foundation was. Because if you that's why I said if you didn't accept it, if you don't accept objective morality, then nothing else matters at that
I feel like I'm
point.
about to step into like presuppositional hell in a second.
It is.
But
I understand. I understand you, Pisco. I understand what
I
you're
really hope that you guys
understand
aren't
where
fucking buying
Ryan's
into
coming from,
Darth Dawkins bullshit.
But I also see where you're coming from, and I'm hoping I'm connecting the two.
This is crazy. So
That's a great clip. Pisco just described our founding philosophy as, quote, Darth Dawkins bullshit.
No,
that's good.
Wait a second. Wait, whoa. Wait, are you serious?
I love you so much.
So you think that the American moral proposition is presuppositional Christianity?
Yes.
No, I think it. I don't think.
Okay,
I don't think it's.
I'll leave it there.
No.
I'll leave it there.
It's a good question. Our founders were a mix of Christians and deists, and that mattered quite a great deal because deists believe in God but don't believe in revelation or miracles necessarily. So Jefferson himself was a deist. He famously removed all references to Jesus's miracles,
divinity
in his personal Bible.
Is that much better?
No, so my point was that when they referenced the creator and nature's law, it was an express broadening from pure Christianity to include the deists in their mix. So I would say it's tightly linked to Christianity, but it's not
presuppositional Christianity. It's very clear.
I mean, our founders expressly referenced the creator in the document.
Yeah, I think that doesn't entail presuppositionalism. I don't know why you're such a just answer the question. We hold these truths about self-evident. I can grant that the framers have particular views about objective morality, whatever. But that statement literally is a statement about belief, not objective proposition, correct? Or not a moral proposition, correct? That's a statement about belief.
It's obviously both.
What do you mean it's both?
Because if I say
literally,
when I say God exists, I am both expressing my personal belief in God and a statement about what I believe to be metaphysical truth.
So when I ask you, does the statement Ryan believes God exists, is that literally a proposition about a moral proposition? You would say no, of course not. That's a statement about belief, correct?
The phrase Ryan believes God exists?
Yes.
That would be a statement of belief.
So if I say we believe literally, it's a statement about belief. Now, it might suggest strongly that there's a moral proposition there that they hold to, of course. But can you at least grant that literally? That's all I was trying to do. You can't even grant
it's not. You
can't even grant it. That's crazy.
No, I'm not granting it because the same words have two. Obviously have two meanings. When I say 2 + 2 is 4, I both mean I believe it is true and it is objectively true. I'm making a epistemological claim about my knowledge, and I am also making an objective claim about a metaphysical fact of the universe. The same sentence can do both things simultaneously, which is obviously what they were doing. And even if you get hung up on the subjective aspect of it, the subjective there is intersubjective. It's not the founders, it's America. So when they say the we is us. And when
it's a statement. You just said it. It's a statement of intersubjective belief. You just said it. You just said it. It's a statement of intersubjective belief.
No,
it's not itself a moral proposition.
I said both, dude. How many times do I have to explain?
No, but literally, but literally,
2 + 2 is 4 again.
Oh no! This is why I originally asked the question: was the left even there to begin with, Ryan? let's pin it.
No, I think that Ryan thinks that if he gives ground on even the most basic things, and it was a similar thing when I brought up the 1860s thing.
On objective truth though, or objective morality,
well,
and that's what.
This is a semantical point. This is a semantical point. It's not at all, doesn't rely on your belief, your belief on meta-ethics.
Do you disagree that when I say 2 + 2 is 4, I am both describing a subjective belief of mine and an objective truth claim?
They're independent. So literally the statement is not a statement about your belief.
The statement is...
Wait. I'll just grant you. If you say 2 + 2 is 4, it does not necessarily entail that the person who says it believes it, correct? Yes or no?
What? Say it again.
Making the statement 2 + 2 = 4 does not necessarily entail the person who states it believes it, correct?
It's theoretically possible. I can't.
So it doesn't entail it, correct? So it doesn't entail it, correct?
It doesn't. I guess it doesn't entail it. It would be what the person is saying.
That's my point.
In generally every context.
That's my point. That's my fucking point. They're different things. That statements about beliefs aren't the propositions themselves about the relative moral statements. They're not same.
Always. But this one
it was a minor point to be like, well, you agree. First of all, like literally, they're not. And you wouldn't even grant it because you can't give ground because your ego's in the way. Your ego's in the way. You can't give any ground.
This one obviously is both.
And that dives back into subjectivity. If I don't believe it, like you and I could look at the same color blue and I think it's one color, you think it's another. It comes down to subjectivity. Let's move on. Put a pin in it.
This is a broad, I think this will close us out. To take the 30,000 foot view, just back to the debate prompt, has the left abandoned the American moral proposition? I think I was trying to keep up back and forth. 15, 20 minutes of our friends on the left basically denying that there even is an American moral proposition, while we're just trying to say it's right there.
That's a fucking lie. Wait, you just lied. Do you agree you just lied?
He did.
So wait. That is a false statement you just said, correct?
I'm saying, explain it to me. Tell me why.
Wait, so you just said we don't believe that there's a American moral proposition, correct? Did you just say that?
Based on, I guess so.
Did you just say that? Yes or no?
I think so. Yeah.
And don't you remember when I said what I thought the American moral proposition was? Yes or no?
The Constitution.
Do you remember, yes or no, when I said what I thought the American moral proposition was?
Yeah, it's a legalistic procedure.
Yes. So you just said I didn't have it. Wait a second. Let me finish. You just said I didn't believe in the American moral proposition, and you just also said that I did. So why don't you correct your statement?
I will happily amend it. You are completely disavowing the commonly held and understood among all people.
Prove that. Well, so the commonly held belief is this meta-ethical view. That's the commonly held belief. Prove that. What's the argument for that, dipshit? What's the argument for that?
That the Declaration of Independence is the moral framework that was laid out, that now the legal framework was built off of.
No. You're saying that you said the commonly held view is that the American moral proposition is this meta-ethical view on objective morality. Fucking prove that. What's your argument for that? Do you have an argument for that? Yes or no?
Let's do the Google test.
What? Sorry. No. As you sit here, do you have an argument? Sorry. As you sit here. Wait. GenZ attorney. As you sit here, GenZ attorney. As you sit here, do you have an argument? Do you have an argument that the term American moral proposition means what Ryan says is the commonly held view?
Based on.
Do you have an argument for that? You either have an argument for that now or you don't.
Yeah. Real simple. I just Googled. What is that? 6 words. What is the American moral proposition? Quote, the American moral proposition refers to the core principles and shared values that define the United States social and political philosophy and are generally expressed in its founding documents, particularly the Declaration of Independence.
Shared values are encompassed in the Declaration of Independence, and none of that is meta-ethical claims.
That's way broader than what you said about meta-ethics. That's crazy.
I just want to have that point be illustrated.
Holy shit.
Commonly understood. I think asking a very simple, basic Google question, and what is the vast resources of the internet? You can say AI is biased, maybe, but a simple
they didn't say what you needed it to say. It didn't say what you needed it to say, my guy. That didn't say what you needed it to say.
And say what is the American moral
proposition? That didn't say what you needed it to say.
They will be directed to the Declaration of Independence, which is our entire point, which you guys are rejecting.
GenZ, didn't you argue earlier that you have to have a belief in literally God-given rights in order to not abandon the American moral proposition?
You did say that,
yes. You conceded on that point.
Yeah, I don't know how else.
So this is like if you're a moral subjectivist,
on the religious
you're God, if you're an atheist,
the historical pieces come into play in terms of how it was written, why it was written, the interpretation, so on and so forth.
And this is like maybe too in the weeds, but it is technically possible without believing God. Like I know he was a great follow, but he left for Blue Sky, so he's not on X anymore. A guy called Secular Outpost, and he was an atheist, but he believed in like essentially Platonic forms, and Platonic forms are almost a one-to-one match for natural law. So like he could get to natural law principles without belief in God, but it required belief in abstract objects. I'm sure there's other ways to go about doing it philosophically that I'm not familiar with, but I've seen it done. It's just, it is, I would say, uncommon and philosophically
uncommon,
demanding.
you say?
Well, I've met one person in my life who does it.
None of this shit is common. Your
God,
particular
I thought you
objective
said this
morality
was
is not
supposed to
common.
close it.
I thought it was a pretty simple point, but
All right,
you know.
I'm closing it. We're moving
Okay.
on. There's a lot of people hanging backstage that would love to come up here, but we need to get through some super chats first. All right, any more super chats? We're going to try to be concise and to the point. One response per person, or zip it. All right, we'll do it that way. Oops, I forgot one. It's okay to be honest and say that MAGA is pro-isolationism and pro-cancel culture, and the left isn't pro that. The far left dabbed in cancel culture, but not the main group like MAGA. MAGA's un-American. Ryan, any thought?
Be a delightful topic for a follow-up debate if people on this panel are willing.
Oh, we're going to talk about the Republicans? You're open to that conversation? A comparative conversation?
Pisco, I've had like 10 hours of conversation with you on that exact topic on your channel.
Oh, come on.
I'm happy to have the conversation. It just wasn't part of this debate tonight, but it sounds like a good one.
Message me the prompt, Ryan. We'll get it set up.
We'll be in touch.
Scott, to you, any thought?
I mean, cancel culture as a thing, I feel like the genesis of that was what the early to mid 2010s of probably a little later, because they were pulling the old tweets, right, of like 10 years ago, but now we're pulling 15, 20-year-old tweets. But from what I recall from that time period, it was pretty much all folks on the right that were getting canceled by folks on the left for making old edgy jokes. And certainly I can fully concede that there now is a not insignificant portion of the right that is doing the same thing, which I have lots of criticism for. The newly coined woke right that is just doing the same tactics as the woke left. But yeah, to think that the far left, to try to minimize that the far left dabbled in cancel culture, I think that's a ultra minimization of what happened back then, and still to this day.
Nonfon, to you, any thoughts?
I have nothing to add. I'm not particularly interested in
Pisco?
that.
I mean, the cancel culture thing is just another example. I don't think it bears that much on the Constitution, except to the extent that it involves the government coercion, which in this case it very much does, and government overstep. And I think they probably shared agreement, at least with Ryan. I don't know about Gen Z. And so, yeah, I like the particular cancel culture. I think everyone is okay with that to some extent, right? Like if you knew that there was some crazy lefty dumpling shop that was saying we don't want to serve Jews, and you wanted to make that like clear to everyone, like I think everyone on this panel would be okay with like signal boosting, like, hey, these guys like are like super anti-Semitic or like super racist. And so I think it's just like a question of, is there government coercion in it? Is the government involving itself in these kinds of discussions? But the First Amendment, and I'm sure the freedoms that are encompassed in whatever natural rights philosophy that Ryan or Gen Z espouse includes like the freedom to contract, I assume, right? And the freedom to choose which agreements you want to do and which businesses to serve. So I don't think they would take an ultimately culturally Marxist view or something that we're bound to support even establishments that we don't agree.
Okay, thank you. Trib says, how long does it take for a group of humans to have objective morals revealed to them, and how would you know when it happens? Is it a generation or two, and do you recognize it based on your own morals? Ryan?
It's a fantastic. Oh, sorry.
No, it is a great question, and it kind of cuts to the heart of the epistemology issue we were discussing earlier, where the fact that you believe in objective morality doesn't mean that you necessarily know what it is, right? What then, once you believe in objective morality, you have to figure out what it is, and there's different ways people go about doing that. If you're religious, you draw your epistemology from your scripture, from your church. There's texts that allow you to do that. If you're not religious, then you need to build a philosophic framework. And the reason that the self-evident language, and I was talking about Scottish common sense moral realism, is so important, is that that's how the founders did it. They cut to the quick with this argument about self-evident truths, which is appealing to both the Christians in the room and the non-Christians in the room, and thus founded kind of a position that could be agreed upon as the American position. But it's not easy, and there's no there's no set prescription. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes, depending who you talk to, revelation. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, but there's certainly an American answer to that question.
Yeah,
Scott?
I think there's. I just want to.
I'll leave it
real quick. I think it's like a really fascinating question because it kind of, to me, provokes in my head like, what's going on here? Like, let's cut to the crap. What's actually doing the work here? I think if the left, by and large, took the political views that Ryan espoused, which is like anti-DEI, anti-race-based anything, like dedication to the rights that he most cares about, being more moderate, rejecting communism, all that stuff. But they're like, we're subjectivists, but we believe all this stuff. Ryan wouldn't be sounding the alarm and be like, oh no, we're fucking losing our culture. So like, what's actually doing the work here? What's actually motivating people to do this or that? And really, I think it has to do with the political views, frankly. I mean, I think that's what's doing the work here. That's what's causing all the concern is the views themselves, not the the moral, meta-ethical framing or grounding of the views themselves. And so that's what I think this question gets at. And it's also the hardness of operationalizing it. Like there is no, have you heard him give a single objective moral proposition contained within the set that he knows to be true and he knows is actually accurate? And given that the fucking framers, who were all smart people, God fuck, they were wrong on a bunch of really, really fucking important shit. So how do we operationalize? How do we actually work with this set of moral propositions that are there to be found? Have we found any of them? How do we know? And to the extent that we're relying on revelation, how do we know that God wouldn't lie to us? Or that the revealed, like ground out that the thing that would cause the revelation isn't itself untrue, or like what grounds that revelation is itself true? All of these questions, I think, have no good answers. And the system that they're promoting doesn't really help us operationalize and isn't actually what's motivating, I think, a lot of the commentary and dissent. I think what's motivating it is the political positions and the effect in the real world.
Which literally, I said this earlier, and I know you got to move faster, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. Earlier, I described a schism between David Hume, who said that reason is always slave to the passions, and the Scottish common sense moral realist, which is how the American philosophy, and Pisco perfectly summarized the Hume's philosophy in his own words. So yeah, there was a schism between those two views. One was rejected, one became the American philosophy.
That's fair. What group in America's history fit the American moral proposition the most, and were they ever the majority? If they were, then how did morality revert? If not, then when will they become the majority?
I think George Washington for me. I think that people give a lot of credit to Madison for writing the document, but the model of our country, I think, has its base. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that there is moral elements to the Constitution and the frame of the country, but a lot of it is geostrategic. The rationale for having a union in the first place. What are the first articles of the Federalists? They're about geostrategic interests. And they're thinking about the president as embodied by Washington defending the country. What's the most important liberty? The liberty to be free from a foreign country or a foreigners invading, like France and at this point Great Britain, invading and conquering and subjugating you. And so I think that a lot of the commentary from GenZAttorney and Ryan is missing that core pragmatic concern at the founding, embodied by George Washington, embodied by the kind of the worries from the framers, which, they were circulating about rights, but the Bill of Rights, remember, Bill of Rights is an afterthought. The Bill of Rights is an afterthought. That's done after the Constitution is ratified. What was primarily motivating the framing generation were geostrategic interests, economic interests, and the longevity of the Union, and the example of George Washington.
See, but though I don't know how many times I brought it up, though, that I am interested in having the historical context-driven discussion, but that seemed to get kind of brushed away as like, well, no, that doesn't really matter too much. When we talk about the contradiction of why some of these contradictions exist between founders who were openly advocating saying that slavery should end in their writings and publicly speaking, but still personally owned slaves. And my whole argument was that was a pragmatic compromise, or why the founders didn't just include it in the Declaration, why they didn't ban it outright immediately. That was all part of this. You use the word geostrategic. I use the word pragmatic.
No, I agree, but you don't understand the point there. The point is, therefore, that slavery and the opposition to it isn't a necessary component of the American moral proposition. As painful as that is to say, the fact that you're saying, yeah, it was a pragmatic thing is further to my point. My point being that opposition to slavery isn't necessary, that the American moral proposition can mean something absent opposition to slavery. That's my point.
No, I
will say.
No. Go ahead, Nonfon.
Well, I was going to reply to the super chat. I don't know if they were wrapped up, but although not all of them were American, I will say a lot of the early utilitarians were right a lot of issues when you look back. Like Jeremy Bentham was arguing for decriminalizing homosexuality. He was a really big opponent of the slave trade. He was interested in animal rights and animal welfare, which I know Ryan doesn't care about that, but these are issues today that we, almost everyone will side with historical utilitarians on.
I think also to answer the question directly, I agree Washington's a good example. I put Lincoln up there too, as far as, he could have just sat back and said, yeah, okay, the cost will not be worth it to march south and ensure the abolition of slavery. But he said, no, this violates our moral principle of slavery as an institution, violates the American moral principle. So we are going to literally declare war, the bloodiest war in American history, the most amount of American lives lost in the Civil War, because everyone who died was American. And so to take on that cost to preserve the Union, to bring the country back together and abolish slavery, I think, that's...
But understand what was happening there, right? Like, I also respect Lincoln a great deal. I think he's certainly in the top 3 presidents, and all his failings notwithstanding, he suspended habeas corpus. He, with the Declaration of Independence, those words were cited by the Confederates as promoting, a lot of the founding generation's descendants, including, I think, some of Washington's descendants and Jefferson's descendants, supported the Confederacy on the basis of the terms of things like the Declaration of Independence. And so I understand that we are taking this view and we're upholding some of our most cherished historical figures. And I'm not one of these people who wants to rain on everyone's parade. I'll pick and choose some of these people who I'll venerate, and I'll topple a couple of statues here and there, right? But in general, I'm against the ultimately culturally relativistic, or sorry, I should say the view that thinks that we shouldn't judge these people relative to their time. But there are a lot of potential contradictions and pitfalls for you who are venerating the Declaration of Independence in justifying why you think the Confederates weren't upholding that. And maybe it's just their support of slavery, but is there something else?
I think Sarah's head is going to explode if we keep giving $50 answers to $10 super chats.
Thank you.
So I have an interesting response, and I invite the listeners to imagine how clever and articulate it was so that Sarah can get paid.
Good answer, Ryan.
That's fair. Yeah, short and precise. We do have a $50 in here that you can expound on a little more. Tom says, left winning by not talking about the left. Good strategy.
It is a good strategy.
It is. But then he says, no offense intended. And keep in mind, I'm usually loaded. But I bet if it was Gen Z and Nonfon only, we'd actually be hearing a debate on the prompt.
Round 2. Set it up.
Kuzium says, for all, if MAGA reps and libs continue being the main groups, what would you do? Would you abolish the two-party system, ditch democracy, remove big donors from it, keep it steady, whatever floats boats? One answer per person, please. Ryan, kick us off.
I think our founders were rightly concerned about faction capture and that political parties would inevitably lead to sort of narcissistic corruption and manipulation of the system. I think they have turned out to be right. So yeah, abolish political parties would be high on my list of priorities.
What? Wait, how could you possibly say that and hold to like free speech and freedom of association? Abolish political parties? What the
fuck? She's asking me, I'm being asked a moral question, Pisco, not a legal question.
No, but morally, yeah,
because my conception of morality is not the same as legality. I know you've expressed clearly that yours is tightly aligned earlier.
But no. I understand a moral question being what we ought do. Do you agree with that? What we ought do?
Yeah, and I think we ought eliminate political parties. Yeah,
through the force of law or not?
I didn't say that. No.
Okay. But that's what I understand. We should ban political parties. I understand that to be a reference.
There's no universe in which I can give a clear and precise answer that will not trigger Pisco into debate mode. Sarah, I swear, I'm trying to get you paid. I'm doing.
You're dropping these bombs. You're dropping these bombs.
Save it for open panel. Write it down. Put a
If
pin
you
in
ever
it.
watched me and Pisco stream together, you can imagine the
last
fucking
hours.
hell that is unleashed when there's no moderation. There's no moderation.
Oh my
there's more of a
god!
guest.
I'll bet there's
It's
like
just-
no stopping point either.
Oh my god,
No, no.
we just yell at each other for like
I'll give you
3
the best
hours and then
example.
get tired.
Scott, do you have one?
Yeah, I'll be quick with it. But no, the best example, Ryan and Pisco debated presidential immunity with a panel of 3 judges who were all non-attorneys, and their questions were like, I have
So
no idea what
stupid.
you guys are saying, but let me try and make a question. Yeah, that was pretty funny. To this question, I guess the only contribution I'll have is I don't think MAGA is here to stay. I think, me and Ryan, one of our main goals in our podcast and political project is kind of what comes next, what's post 2028 or 2028 and beyond. And we're, I think, both of the same belief that there will be a segment of the population that is only Trump voting, and when Trump is no longer here, they will no longer be voting. And we're very curious to see kind of what comes next as far as how much of the MAGA banner will Vance carry with him versus kind of redefine himself as something new. And then, of course, the rest of the party too. DeSantis, is he really going to be a MAGA guy moving forward? So yeah, we're kind of curious to see what comes next, but we don't think it's going to be MAGA, at least in the current way people think of it. Unless Marjorie Taylor Greene, she saves it. She's making her own MAGA.
Fair enough. Non-fun.
I guess I'll say if we could do like proportional voting, which would encourage, more parties, like that'd probably be good. I wouldn't dish democracy or anything. I'm not that concerned about money in politics, but I would, obviously to the extent it influences legislation in a bad way, I would be against it and I'd try to remove it.
Okay. Fair enough. Powder Dusty sends 10 just to complete the goal on my
Dusty.
behalf. Thank you. So
Props.
Kuzium, also known as Trip One, says it's important for people who presuppose to think about that presupposition and throw it out of the debate when discussing topics like this. Your truth isn't objective truth. Engage with agreed upon terms. Ryan, I know you got a lot to say about that. Go for it.
I'll try to keep it really simple. It's not my truth. It's the belief about what is true espoused in the Declaration of Independence. Now, you can say that's presuppositional and you can reject it if you want, but then there's no agreed upon American moral proposition. This is the only one we have. So, you can reject it, but then what's left? It's just everybody inventing their own, which is kind of a bummer. If you don't think the Declaration is the American moral proposition, I don't think there's any one to find.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo. I think there have to be these binding things. I had another quote from another Federalist paper. I don't know if I still have it pulled up, but basically about it is a moral thing to be a united people. Actually, I should have it here. A Federalist 2. Yeah. Oh, I had a long quote, but the basic summation of it is there is a moral component to being a united people and having things that unite you. And I think when we turn into deconstructing everything, it's just breaking down everything that could possibly unite us. And I just don't think it's good for the country and its survival.
Okay.
I want to just say on that front, like a lot of this has to turn on like the term American moral proposition, which, as I understand it, is not a term of art. It's not something that I understand to have like a fixed meaning that people agree to. And so when you introduce like a term like that into a debate, like as a proposition, I have a justification for why what I take the meaning of that to be. But unless we have like a meaning that we're ascribing to it, either a common usage meaning or a technical meaning that's found somewhere of the term, not of other ideas that like lead to the beliefs of the founders or whatever, of the term, then like, who are you to say the meaning of the term is better? It's better than my meaning. Like my meaning is controlling over your meaning. I just like don't understand that loaded nature of that like objective meaning of terms, especially one that doesn't have a fixed usage.
I'm curious about that because why? So obviously I have what I brought into this, which is I believe the American moral proposition is that passage of the Declaration. That's the moral framework for the country. That's what I brought into it. I had not even looked it up to see what would other people define as the American moral proposition. But when I did my 6-word Google search, all the sources I found were all pointing to the same thing that I was pointing to. So I'm curious, why do you think I'm the one with the proprietary definition and it's not you that has a different definition than what the...
I think we both, to be clear, I think that we both have like, because this is a term of art. This is not a term of art. It's not one in which there's like a widespread usage, and it's like introduced to just bootstrap your own moral intuitions. And so to be clear, I don't think that like my definition is quote unquote better than yours. My explanation for like my usage of the term is like I'm thinking about a set of like attitudes or dispositions that is consistent across time, space, and geography within America. And I'm like, whatever the thing is that binds America is going to have to be, both in time and in history, needs to be quite broad. Otherwise, it's not going to capture this kind of like a broad coalition that I think is being hinted at with the nature of the question. Because, right, the nature of the question is abandoning something that has existed, right, for a while. And so that's my explanation for why I get on, because that's the only like through line that I can look temporally and geographically throughout the country's history that I point to. Now,
in the vain hope that we can do this faster, I asked to come up with this prompt. I asked myself the question: is America a propositional nation? To which the answer is yes. And then I said, what is the proposition? The obvious answer is the Declaration of Independence. So that's the logical line that brought me to this place.
And I don't want to belabor the point, but I just kind of want to bring up again, it's like just a quick skim of all these links and sources I can look to. They are all referring to the same thing, and it's what I'm talking about. So I just don't understand why I'm the one with the proprietary definition here.
No, because you haven't pointed to a usage of the specific term. You can point to AI summaries or
no,
something.
I'm just scrolling like
there's a whole panel backstage, and I know one particularly who will give you that answer probably. Nonfon, I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to add something.
I have nothing to add. Move on.
Fair enough. Patrick says, debate itself is predicated on the objective moral ought to keep ourselves and each other honest. Honesty is an objective moral enterprise, and you can't be accountable to space and matter. You can only be accountable to a person. Truth is a person. Ryan, go ahead.
Gibberish.
I mean, I'm obviously not inclined to disagree with that point given my particular beliefs. But again, I think it's enough for the purpose of this debate to say that there is an American moral proposition and that it's located in a specific document without having to do the full justification. But I certainly am not inclined to disagree with this.
Scott?
Yeah, yes, everything Ryan says, I agree with. Move on.
Nonfon?
It seems almost meaningless to me. I don't even know what he's trying to get across, really.
Gibberish, pure gibberish, word salad.
Oh,
we can do a debate on ontological arguments another time.
The $50 super chat, everybody's just like, quick answers.
Sarah, what we're doing here is we're trying to come up with a scheme to cost you money. We're executing it as perfectly as possible. Like low dollars, huge responses. High dollars, fuck it. We're here to screw you over, Sarah.
That is our shared moral proposition.
You wouldn't know it to look at him, but Nonfon's going to just drop some slurs and get you demonetized any second. It's coming.
Oh, Jason says AMP is the idea that human beings are born free and equal and inherent rights that no government can legitimately take away. It's the moral foundation that underpins the whole American experiment.
Yeah, but what does that mean, and why is it inconsistent with DEI objectively? Right, like that's the problem. Is if it's inconsistent with DEI, you need an account for that also accounts for all the other horrible fucking ideas that are consistent with it.
That goes back to what Scott was saying earlier, the negative and the positive rights and how they are contradicting each other because you are impeding on mine by me giving to yours.
Yeah, and I didn't think that was super convincing that there actually was a contradiction there. We went over that, but we can move on.
I don't want to relitigate the directionality argument because I think we did it to death. But I'll echo that this is I agree with this wholeheartedly. And if you look at like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote about the his experiences in the gulags in the USSR, one of the things that he expressly calls out is that when people believe that your rights are from the government, there's no higher standard against which the government can be judged. And in that circumstance, terrible oppression is a certainty. So I think that it is important that we think there's a standard higher than even our constitutional framework, that there is a standard against which right and wrong can be judged.
Scott?
Yeah, real quick on that. I mean, it's the whole basis for, why were we able to prosecute the Nazis in Nuremberg? It's if they adopted everything they did, they adopted through their political process. And certainly you can say Hitler took it too far with the way he used the political process. But at the end of the day, if stuff is done illegally in accordance with the procedures, then what's the basis for criticism if that's the entire moral framework that we're operating with? And the reason that we're able to proceed at Nuremberg is because they can appeal to a higher standard that says, yes, what you did might have been legal under your laws, but it still violated the laws of nature, and therefore we can prosecute you for that.
Nonfon?
I mean, I feel like the whole debate has been us laying out our issues with that. Obviously, it's like it's overly narrow. I think you're what the American moral proposition is should not include sort of meta-ethical claims about like natural rights, like being intrinsic. I think that's way too narrow. I think it should also include some adherence to the documents we actually have and some of the values that American society like generally has, both now and at the time.
Pisco?
Yeah, I think it also needs to make sense to add on to that, and then I want to just ping Gen Z real quick. Add on to that, I think it can't just be the framing generation. It also needs to include like the development over time that has existed, and how we've added on to that, and make sense of some kind of unity across time and geography. And if the point is like that the thing that does that is the Declaration of Independence as understood by Ryan and Gen Z, then I just think that like that wasn't a universally held view, the way in which they're presenting it. And there are ways in which their vision of the Declaration of Independence or how they view it was inconsistent by like everyone in the founding generation. And the only thing left to distinguish the DEI people from the Thomas J's is this like vague notion of directionality, which I don't even think makes sense. To Gen Z real quick, the one thing I'll say is, we look back at the Nazis and we're like, horrible, horrible fucking people. You knew it was wrong when you did it. Fuck you. You weren't holding anything. Why don't you have that moral attitude towards the slave holders?
So, sorry, could you rephrase it?
Yeah. So you look back, you referenced Nuremberg, at the Nazis who instituted that, and you're like, fucking pieces of shit. These are evil people that deserved what they got because they did something wrong. Why don't you have that attitude towards the founders of America, given slavery is a moral blight in your eyes?
I could give a long answer. I think I would just give it short and point once again, I think, to pragmatic decisions that are being made as a consequence of the time you are in. And I don't know what the
Nazis thought it was pragmatic. Yeah, they thought killing the Jews.
I would appeal to a law of nature and objective morality that says I don't care what if they thought it was pragmatic, it was still.
So just because Jefferson thought it was pragmatic, same thing.
No, here's the difference. I don't see the Nazis as having any sort of pragmatic compromise on the table of why they needed to.
In their mind, they did.
But appealing to the higher law that we're appealing to.
Does the higher power recognize the pragmatic considerations of Thomas Jefferson in having slavery?
So I'm pointing to when I look at Jefferson and the founders.
You're applying God's law to the Nazis, but Jefferson's pragmaticism to the Jeffersons. So I'm asking for God's opinion on both. Is it equivocation?
The law applies, of course, God's law applies to everybody. The difference that we're dealing with here is if you're going to strictly apply it to the founders, then you're putting the entire American political project at risk, which is a project that...
Yeah, the Nazis thought the Jews were putting the German project at risk too. They literally thought that killing the Jews was a war.
This is going to be the directionality thing over and over and over again. So
okay.
just to point it out, at the time that the Nazis did what they did, we already knew that you had a moral obligation to treat people as individuals, and they violated it and put people in ovens anyway.
And we didn't in the time of the founding of the country. We didn't know that we needed to treat them as individuals.
They are more morally accountable than people who struggled and failed to abolish slavery because they instituted a new violation rather than failing to abolish an existing violation, which is clearly a difference. It's just not one that you care to recognize. But in any case, this is a super chat, not a debate.
Fair enough. Last two, and then we're moving on. Unwilling says, are closed or open borders more correct under the proposition? Are closed borders DEI for one class?
I love this.
No, this is a great question.
This is a great question
really
because the country until 1870 was completely open borders. The first restrictive immigration law was the Page Act in 1870. First one. So open borders, absolutely in keeping with the tradition of America up till 1870. And I think that's totally within the American moral position to have open borders.
But misleading. There was not federal law, but the states enforced their own immigration policy. So, for example, if you were going to be a ward of the state or found to be of low moral character, they could just banish you. They could just kick you out of the state. So federal law started being enforced on immigration later, but the states themselves enforced immigration policy earlier. But to answer the question directly, I think this is a really interesting question. Like, I am not opposed to immigration. And I think that, like, if you take my beliefs to their logical extension, America should be promoting natural rights across the globe. America should be trying to explain its moral philosophy. My
but that's counter to the framers, right? The framers understood the importance of borders.
Let me answer the question. The question specifically, though, should we have open borders now, has a lot to do with whether we are able to assimilate people into the American moral proposition. If you have mechanisms in place where you can bring people into America and assimilate them into the core American belief system, then immigration is not necessarily a bad thing. If you can't, though, and if you're bringing in people who don't have don't support the American moral proposition and have conflicting beliefs, that's going to be a problem eventually, because you dilute the people who actually do believe in the proposition. So the answer is, it's very complicated, and it has a lot to do with our failure as a society right now to have good assimilation protocols. But hopefully we can fix that.
Discrimination on the basis of an individual's beliefs is in accordance with the American moral proposition?
Yeah, obviously. Like,
all right.
Of course.
Nonfon or Scott, did you have a thought to add in?
Yeah, I would say the other aspect we didn't really get into tonight, but I would include as part of the founding American moral proposition is this idea that times will change, and therefore the systems of government needs to allow for things to change over time. That's why we have the amendment process. That's why we can that's really why we have the amendment process, to change the Constitution over time. And so certainly the founders' understanding of the role that immigration was going to have to play in the society. When you've got this big, huge mass of land, I can certainly understand wanting people to come just freely and then from there be subject to the laws and behave from there. But now, when we are at a point where the land is populated and it's just a different calculation, it's a different equation that has to be taken into consideration. And that's why.
And where's that in the Declaration of Independence?
Nonfon, your thought?
I mean, technically, I think open borders are probably more, related to the American war prospect than like fully closed borders. Certainly, maybe you can make some argument that having like semi-closed, some screening for beliefs or whatever, insofar as there's like some paradox of tolerance is conducive to the American moral prospect. But I mean, I think America in its sort of expanded version, expanded compared to Ryan and GenZAttorney's view of the American moral prospect. We're supposed to be a land of opportunity. We're supposed to be have freedom. We're supposed to accept immigrants in as we did for the first 200 years as a nation or whatever.
Okay. And last but certainly not least, Patrick sends another 10 to say, if good equals ought and bad equals ought not, then the evil God model collapses by proposing that the foundation of truth and good is ought not. No one needs to worry about self-defeating evil God model.
Just gibberish.
No, he's right.
It's not a valid argument. It's gibberish.
No, he's right. Because if you presuppose an evil God who is completely controlling your reality and tricking you and doing all sorts of terrible things to you, then you have reason to doubt every truth, every process, every statement you make could be the influence of this malevolent deity.
Isn't in your view that God is...
Finish the fucking thought.
Oh my God.
And including the thought that God is tricking you, which is why it becomes viciously self-defeating. If you take the premise God is evil and deceiving me, you end with a reason to reject the premise God is evil and deceiving me, because and as a result you have nothing to believe in left. So Patrick is completely right.
It's logically invalid gibberish. And isn't the whole view of these presuppositionals that God defines what good is in the first place? And so in what sense could lying...
God is what's good.
Wait. So is God good
Are you gonna do the?
God,
we're gonna do the
wait, hang
Euthyphros
on.
dilemma now?
Yeah. So is
Okay.
God adhering to some third party standard then?
No, God is
Okay.
good. There's
Because
a unity of identity between God and goodness.
Right. So whatever God does and whatever God's nature is by definition good, correct?
If God does it, is by definition good. Yes.
Okay. So if God lies, it's by definition good. So you can't say evil things that he's doing like lying. Lying, if God lies, it would be good, correct?
God wouldn't lie, but also
I'm not asking if he would lie. I'm asking if God did lie, would it be good?
No,
Then
it's
he
like
wouldn't be
asking
God.
That's like asking, can God create a rock so heavy?
No,
he can't
or
lift
what's
it?
the logical
God
what's the
doesn't
logical
do-
contradiction?
God-
What's
it's not?
the logical contradiction in him lying, in God lying? What's the logical contradiction entailed by God
If
lying?
we're assuming that there's a moral law that says lying is wrong in all instances, which I don't actually think there is, then the contradiction would have been that God is doing something evil. I don't think that's a moral law, and if
Right,
there
so
was,
there's no
then he wouldn't do it because it's a contradiction.
Wait, no, you don't.
But this
You
is
just
like
said
this is
Well,
totally.
that
you just
Pisco,
said
that wouldn't be God. That's what he's trying to say. That's not
wait.
God.
Why? So that's just restating the conclusion. The conclusion is God won't lie, and I'm asking you to justify that conclusion, which is God won't lie. And your response to that is, well, God wouldn't do that. That's just restating the conclusion. I'm asking for an argument to justify it.
It's the same argument as when people make.
It's not an argument. You're restating the conclusion.
It's like when people say, "Can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it?" The response is that God doesn't do things that can't or won't do things that are logically contradictory.
I'm asking you, what is the logical contradiction in God lying?
Your question assumes that lying is a moral wrong in all instances. So if that is true, then it would be a contradiction. Well, okay, if we assume that lying is not morally wrong, then God lied because it was good. But I don't.
Right. So there's nothing. So you just admitted. So you just admitted that there is no logical contradiction entailed in God lying.
If we assume that lying is not morally wrong,
I'm not assuming that. I'm not assuming anything about whether lying is morally good or not. I'm asking you whether or not there's a contradiction in God lying, and you just said, there's no contradiction.
I would say yes, there is, because
what's the contradiction?
I think lying is morally wrong, but that's why I was asking.
How do you define what moral wrong is?
We have to bake in morality into lying.
No, but you define you define lying based on God's nature and what He does.
But the basic answer is that's not God.
Yeah.
No, but I'm asking. That's just repeating. Wait, Sarah. That's just repeating. That's just repeating the claim. That's just repeating the claim. The claim is God won't lie. I'm asking.
This is ultimately why the founders rejected Hume and embraced Scottish common sense moral realism.
Because you're caught and you don't have an answer for
this. Because what happens is the David Humes and the Kants endlessly dissect what morality is. And the end result is there is no morality left.
Who asked about Hume? Who asked? No one cares. Address the proposition.
Common sense point that we do know what right and wrong is.
Address the point. No one's asking for history lesson. Address the point. Why? What is the contradiction? You haven't. You just restated the claim. You're like, God wouldn't lie. And I'm asking, like, well, why? What's the contradiction entailed by God lying? And you're like, well, if you assume that God is
because God is good and deceiving us would be bad, God would not do that.
But why is lying is bad? Is defined in your worldview under your lights by what God would do.
God's nature, which is truth.
Right? No. But I'm asking. So you're defining what is good or bad based on God's nature, and you say that God's nature is that He can't lie.
I am describing it, but okay.
You're describing God's nature as what
Have
is.
You never had a conversation with a Christian?
Hang on a second. Wait, no.
I feel like this is.
You're defining. I can tell Pisco has actually had this conversation before.
Yeah, it's totally obvious that I'm totally familiar with these conversations, right? Ryan, you would admit that the fact that I'm engaging on this level and addressing the Euthyphro dilemma and addressing these arguments, it's clear that I've had these conversations before, correct?
Well, no, I think I think what's happening is that you're kind of running this flowchart, and there's a reality that these flowcharts terminate, and where they end with the Euthyphro's dilemma is like Thomas Aquinas's identity solution, which is God and good are the same thing. And people have been debating this philosophically for
why is lying
hundreds and hundreds of years. So the idea that you and I are going to resolve it in this conversation, I don't think it's going to happen.
This is presuppositional Dawkins garbage.
As is the Declaration of Independence, according to Pisco.
No, I didn't say that.
Let's go ahead and bring our panel up, and we can hopefully get some more conclusive things from then. Here you go. All right, gentlemen. Most of you are familiar with my rules, but I do see a lot of new faces here. So thank you for joining. And I do have two more hanging out backstage. I've got Brandon and Re-Examination hanging back there. If you want to see them up, we play the lovely game of boot anyone else off in order to get them up. However, Gen Z, Ryan, Nonfon, and Pisco are all off limits. You cannot boot them at all. They stay as long as they wish. One big rule here is the interruption game. I freaking hate it. Please don't do it. If one person is talking, do not jump in. It will get on my nerves dearly. Also, the gauntlet is officially open. I will be rating us over there here shortly after I get it set up. But if you want to make your way over, if you know where you're going, go on over. All right. First backstage, I had Ryan, of course. If you want to go ahead and open us up with a thought.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, after this, I will be opening a petition where we can all sign up to make sure that Ryan changes his name, because he's clearly the false Ryan here. As the one true Ryan, I first wanted to point out that equity, which was constantly misdefined throughout this, is about opportunity, or equality of opportunity of outcome, not just opportunity of, not just equality of outcome, right? This is constantly misused by people who talk about equity. I don't know why. I mean, I have theories of why, but in reality, when people are talking about equity, they're talking about removing barriers to people being having opportunities, right? So it doesn't mean that everyone has to end up in the same position, right? It just means that if there are barriers that exist that are preventing them from accessing those opportunities, that those should be alleviated. That's the whole goal of equity. So how is that inconsistent with the goals of equality and the American moral proposition?
No, this is a fun game. I'm going to quote one of my favorite professors, Steven Pinker, who said, I have no problem with diversity and equity and inclusion in theory, but I'm forced to point out that, like the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, there's a problem about the misuse of terms. Like I have seen people describe equity in the way that you're describing it. The problem is that the programs that are instituted on the basis of equity do not do what you describe. When you put a quota on board membership, that is not removing barriers. That is trying to push people to have equal outcomes. When you push affirmative action, that is not removing barriers. That is trying to push for specific outcomes. When you give money on the basis of race, that's not removing barriers. That is pushing for specific outcomes. So I actually agree with you, by the way. If equity was what it should be, which is, hey, we've done a really good job achieving legal equality. Know what we should do? We should try to find a way to make society better. And we should do it while still treating everybody as individuals and while holding to our moral principles. Then I would agree with you, by the way. I think that version of equity is fine. The problem is that's just not the version of equity that the left is enacting.
And
do you mind if I jump in?
Let Ryan
Mike. No, it's okay. I trust Mike.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Just so I don't disappoint anybody. I've got like half hour, 45 minutes in me, and then I'm gonna have to go to sleep. I got work tomorrow.
Sure.
Yeah, and Ryan, Gen Z, good to see you again.
Hey, buddy. What's up?
I just wanted to make this point, and then I'll drop because I know there are other people waiting as well. But I did want to ask about this, because I wanted to engage on the debate prompt on your terms, Ryan, which is that the American moral proposition is the Declaration of Independence, right? And so one of those is that all men are created equal, right? Mm-hmm. Like you would agree that is the objective truth under the American moral proposition.
Yeah.
So my first question is, why do you think liberals and Democrats support DEI policies? Like, what is it? What are they after?
Oh, are you asking me to guess what they're thinking or to explain why I think they're thinking it? Because those are two different questions.
Well, why don't you tell me what you think they think?
Okay. I think that the way our education system is set up right now, if you look like the work of Jonathan Haidt, it strips or vastly reduces certain aspects of moral thinking and enhances other aspects of moral thinking, in particular fairness and equity concerns, which primes people to believe in a certain way.
Answer the fucking question. He asked you what they believe, not why they believe it.
Hold on.
I'm working on it. So I think that you have a collection of beliefs. There are some people who just think this is more fair and haven't really thought about the philosophy at all and don't see the contradictions. I think there are other people who are, overt collectivists, and they ascribe to, some form of like neo-Marxism or socialism or other form of collectivism and would prefer that system, and it's overt. So I think it's a mix of various things, but that's my best guess.
Would you agree with me that the Democrats are focused on at least outcomes when it comes to DEI, right? So that the Democrats see a disparate outcome, right? They say like Black people make up X percentage of the population. They are disproportionately disadvantaged in this way. Okay, so if you believe that all men are created equal, wouldn't it follow then that if Black people make up X percent of the population, we would expect to see a proportionate outcome?
No.
And if we see a
that's fucking good.
No.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
No.
Allow me to
If all men are created equal,
let me stab at that.
Allow me to interject real quick. I'm just shutting down on the tomato side. We're going to raid over to the gauntlet if you already know where you go and get there. Otherwise, I'll drop the link in the chat or follow the raid. Back to you, Ryan.
This is great. I didn't even think of that.